Hey guys, tonight we're opening the curtains on one of the most intoxicatingly dangerous stories in royal history, and just a fair warning, if you were somehow teleported back to this moment in time, you probably wouldn't survive it. Honestly, the odds are stacked against you. No modern medicine, a lot of food that might kill you, and political schemes sharper than any sword. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, what city are you tuning in from and what time is it there? I love knowing who's awake with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Alexandria, the year is 48 BCE, and the city smells of spice, sea salt and damp stone. The sun dips behind marble columns, and the streets buzz with gossip about a queen so brilliant, so dangerous that men twice her age lose their heads, sometimes literally, trying to hold her attention. Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra is 21 years old, not yet the legend she will become, but already a political player in a world where every step could mean survival or ruin. She's no Hollywood beauty with kohl-lined eyes and a flowing gown. Ancient coins show a sharp nose, a strong jawline, and the kind of face that tells you she wins through wit and charisma, not just cheekbones. You catch the scent of perfumed oil and honey as you slip into her palace chambers, where tapestries shimmer in torchlight. Cleopatra doesn't just want to keep her throne, she wants to expand it, and for that she has her eyes on Rome. Enter Julius Caesar, fresh from chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. He's 52, balding, battle-hardened, and frankly exhausted from civil war. But when Cleopatra makes her famous entrance, rolled up in a carpet, smuggled past guards to meet him in secret, it's not just an act of seduction, it's a political Hail Mary. She needs him to back her claim to the Egyptian throne against her brother-husband Ptolemy XIII, a boy king manipulated by courtiers. You watch her unfold from the rug like a stage illusionist, laughing softly at Caesar's astonishment. She doesn't bow, instead she speaks in his own language, Greek, dazzling him with intelligence, wit, and ambition. The air crackles with tension, and you realise you're witnessing not just an affair, but a tectonic shift in world history. Here's the historical fact you can bank on. Cleopatra and Caesar did become lovers, and their alliance cemented her rule in Egypt. Caesar installed her back on the throne, and she bore him a son, Caesarion, who would later become a political lightning rod. But here's the fringe rumour. Ancient writers whispered that Cleopatra used more than charm. Some said she had secret recipes of aphrodisiacs, potions brewed from exotic plants and resins that could inflame desire and cloud judgment. Maybe true, maybe not, but Rome's senators surely believed it, muttering that Caesar had been bewitched. And here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Did Cleopatra genuinely love Caesar, or was the entire relationship a calculated political manoeuvre? Historians split into camps. One side argues that their bond was pragmatic, an exchange of power and protection. The other insists there was passion, that she risked too much for it to be only business. You look at the way she leans close, whispering so only he can hear, her hand brushing his arm, and you feel the magnetism of someone who could be both strategist and lover at the same time. You step into Alexandria's harbour at night, watching Roman ships burn as Caesar's legions clash with Ptolemy's forces. The city glows with firelight, screams echo, and yet Cleopatra stays composed, gliding through chaos like a goddess untouched. You realise this is her gift, the ability to turn crisis into opportunity. Caesar admires that, maybe envies it, and you're swept into the soft echo of sandals on marble floors, the glitter of gold against obsidian skin, and the dangerous hum of a love story that's less romance, more loaded dice roll with history itself on the table. What's strange is how quickly the scandal grows. Back in Rome, tongues wag. Caesar is already married, technically, though his wife lives apart, and here he is parading an Egyptian queen through the streets. Senators whisper about foreign influence, about Egypt's wealth slipping into Cleopatra's lap, about a bastard child who might one day claim the Roman throne. You sense the crackle of resentment building, and it's clear. This isn't just a fling. It's a threat to the world order. Still, Cleopatra plays the game to perfection. She hosts Caesar on the Nile in a grand procession, floating on a barge draped in purple sails, musicians playing as incense drifts. You watch him smile, old soldier turned wide-eyed boy, charmed against his better judgment. She has what she wanted, her throne secured by Roman steel, and her legend written into history. But you know, because you're standing at the edge of time, that this story won't end well. Caesar's enemies sharpen their daggers, and Cleopatra's gamble will echo long after the torches of Alexandria gutter out. For now, though, you linger in the twilight glow of the Queen's chamber. The world feels suspended, like a lull before the storm. Cleopatra leans out over the balcony, the Nile gleaming like a ribbon below, and whispers to Caesar about the future. You feel it, that heady, dangerous mix of lust and ambition, the kind that can rewrite maps and topple empires. The fire hasn't gone out yet, it only shifts. Months later, you're not in Alexandria anymore, but trailing Cleopatra and Caesar along the Mediterranean Sea, sailing toward a destiny that seems equal parts glitter and disaster. You can almost taste the salt spray as their barge cuts across calm waters, its purple sails snapping in the wind. Cleopatra stands at the bow, a living emblem of Isis, her dark hair pinned with gold, her eyes locked on the horizon, as if she already knows where this story ends. Mark Antony isn't in the picture yet, but his shadow already hovers, waiting for Caesar's blood to spill on the Senate floor. For now, the Queen is radiant, her throne secured, her enemies subdued. But love stories in the ancient world never stay simple, do they? They sprawl into operas stitched with betrayal, envy, and more daggers than any one person deserves. When Caesar falls to the blades of Brutus, Cassius, and their friends in the theatre of Pompey, Cleopatra's world snaps like a bowstring. Imagine the shock. She's tethered her fate to the most powerful man in Rome, only to see him bleed out in public. You feel her pulse quicken in the aftermath. She has their son, Caesarion, and with him perhaps a claim, but in the cutthroat chaos of Roman politics, being Caesar's lover is suddenly as dangerous as being his enemy. She flees back to Egypt, gripping her child, the corridors of her palace echoing with the knowledge that Rome is leaderless, and that someone new will come knocking, and here comes Mark Antony. It's years later, 41 BCE, and you find yourself strolling into a banquet so drenched in spectacle, it makes Vegas look modest. Cleopatra, knowing Antony has a taste for luxury and theatrics, sails up the Cydnus River on a barge gilded in gold. The sails are perfumed, the oars dipped in silver, the air thick with incense. Musicians play, dancers sway, and Cleopatra reclines like a goddess come to earth. Antony, grizzled and war-worn from endless campaigns, can't resist. The man who once commanded legions is suddenly blinking like a dazzled boy at summer fireworks. Here's the fact nailed down by history. Cleopatra and Antony become lovers, and together they form one of the most infamous alliances in the ancient world. They marry, despite Antony already having a Roman wife, and they have 3 children. Their bond isn't just passion, it's strategy. Cleopatra needs Antony's Roman legions to defend her throne. Antony needs her wealth to fuel his wars. Together, they present themselves as rulers of the East, partners not just in bed, but in empire. Now here's the fringe. Some ancient writers claimed Cleopatra dabbled in more than seduction. They said she experimented with poisons, not just to defend herself, but to prepare for the day she might need to take her own life. There's a story that she tested toxins on prisoners, watching carefully which left the cleanest death. Imagine that, she could serve wine with one hand and plot a lethal end with the other, smiling all the while. Did she do it? No one can prove it, but the rumour lingers like smoke around her legend. And the open scholarly debate, whether Antony truly lost his political edge because of love. Roman writers hostile to Cleopatra claimed she enslaved him, that he abandoned duty for indulgence, even dressing as a god in her ceremonies. Others argue that's propaganda, crafted by his rival Octavian, later Augustus, to justify war. Was Antony really blinded by passion, or was he simply making a rational gamble on Cleopatra's resources, only to lose the roll of history's dice? Scholars go back and forth, and you're left watching him raise a jewelled goblet, his face flushed, trying to decide if the man looks like a lover or a fool. The scandal comes to a head at Actium, 31 BCE. You're there on the rocky shore, watching Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet face Octavian's disciplined navy. The wind stings your skin, the clash of oars and screams of men filling the air. And then, chaos. Cleopatra, perhaps panicking or perhaps executing a pre-planned escape, sails her ships out of the battle. Antony abandons the fight to follow her. Historians still argue why. Did she betray him? Did he choose her over victory? All you know is that Octavian claims the sea, and Antony's reputation sinks with the wreckage. Back in Alexandria, you drift through candlelit halls thick with despair. Antony, humiliated, drinks too much, broods too long. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, looks for new angles, even trying to negotiate with Octavian. You can feel the weight of tragedy pressing in, the sense that the walls of this palace are closing around them. When Antony finally falls on his sword, mortally wounded, he's carried to Cleopatra. She cradles him, blood staining her gown, the echoes of their first golden days now shattered into sobs and silence. And then, the most enduring image, Cleopatra, choosing death over humiliation. The story everyone knows says she lets an asp bite her, slipping away with regal calm. But scholars debate even that. Was it poison smeared on a comb? Was it staged by Octavian's men? Did she really choose, or was choice stripped from her? The truth drifts like smoke through centuries, impossible to pin down. You're left in the chamber where she dies, the air heavy with perfume and despair, golden bracelets slipping from her wrists. Outside, Roman soldiers wait to claim Egypt for Augustus. But inside, the queen becomes a legend. Love, scandal, ambition, all wrapped in silk and venom, and you can't help but feel that Mark Antony wasn't her ruin, and she wasn't his. They were each other's accelerants, the spark and the flame burning too brightly to last. You've barely caught your breath from the smoke of Cleopatra's last chamber before the air shifts. The torches gutter, the Nile fades, and now you're dropped into damp, stone-walled corridors where English whispers bounce like daggers off the plaster. The year is 1525, and the Tudor court hums with the same dangerous mix of perfume, intrigue, and lust you thought you left behind in Alexandria. This time, though, the stage is London, and the star is Henry VIII, the king who will teach Europe that desire can redraw church walls and spill blood across a nation. You picture him, younger than the bloated, bearded portrait you probably know. Right now he's still a swaggering athlete, his red gold beard trimmed, his calves showing off in silk hose, and his ego the size of a cathedral. You stand near a carved oak doorway in Whitehall Palace, where courtiers whisper about the king's latest obsession. It isn't just any mistress, though. This one is different. She's sharp, stylish, and not at all willing to be cast aside like her sister. Her name is Anne Boleyn, and the scandal she's about to unleash will shake the foundations of the throne and the church alike. Here's the historical fact. Henry was already married to Catherine of Aragon, his queen for nearly 2 decades when he fell for Anne. Catherine had given him a daughter, Mary, but no surviving sons. For Henry, that was a political crisis. He needed a male heir to secure the Tudor line. But when Anne refused to become just another royal mistress, Henry's desire for her became tangled with his desperation for succession. She told him plainly, if he wanted her, he had to make her queen. Now, the fringe angle. Some later accounts claim Anne practiced sorcery, using charms or enchanted tokens to hold Henry's attention. Protestants dismissed it as Catholic slander. Catholics insisted it explained his obsession. Did she really slip him love talismans, or was her only magic her intelligence and refusal to yield? Either way, the rumour stuck, adding a whisper of witchcraft to her already dangerous allure. The scholarly debate that never dies centres here. Was Henry's decision to break with the Catholic Church, what we call the English Reformation, truly driven by lust for Anne, or was it the culmination of political and financial motives already brewing? Some historians argue Henry simply used Anne as the spark to ignite a fire he already wanted. More power, more control over wealth and clergy. Others say no, it really was her dark eyes and quick wit that made a king rip an entire kingdom out of Rome's grip. You walk into the king's council chamber, where parchment scratches under candlelight. Men argue Latin phrases, pouring through biblical verses that Henry waves like playing cards. Leviticus forbids a man to marry his brother's widow, he insists, pointing at Catherine's first marriage to his brother Arthur. The Pope, trapped politically between Spain and England, stalls for years. Meanwhile, Henry grows more impatient, more obsessed with Anne, who parades through court in French fashions, her pearl-studded sleeves whispering with each movement. The tension is palpable, like a storm pressing against the windows. You find yourself in the chapel where Catherine kneels in prayer, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whiten. She refuses to concede. In public, she declares herself Henry's true wife, her marriage valid in the eyes of God. Her quiet dignity stirs sympathy, while Anne gathers enemies who call her the concubine. But Henry doesn't care. He's drunk on desire and destiny, convinced that his bed must also be his battlefield. By 1533, the impossible becomes reality. Against papal orders, Henry marries Anne in secret. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer declares the union valid, and Catherine is cast aside, her title stripped, her daughter Mary demoted to illegitimate. The scandal isn't just whispered gossip anymore. It's a political earthquake. Across Europe, monarchs and popes shake their heads, but Henry barrels forward, declaring himself the head of the Church of England. All because of one woman he could not, and would not forget. But here's where the candlelight flickers ominously. Anne gives birth, and it's a girl, Elizabeth. The baby's wails echo through Greenwich Palace, not the triumphant cry of a son Henry demanded. The king swallows his disappointment, but you feel the chill in the room, the sense that Anne's position is already precarious. In the meantime, Henry's interest doesn't burn as brightly as it once did. The same court that whispered about Catherine now whispers about Anne's sharp tongue, her enemies sharpening theirs in return. As you walk the long gallery lined with tapestries, you feel the unease creeping in. The same passion that once lifted Anne up will eventually drag her down. For tonight, though, she is queen, her crown gleaming in candlelight, her daughter swaddled in crimson silk, and Henry's hand heavy on her shoulder. The scandal has changed not only her life but the destiny of England, tearing down centuries of religious authority and planting seeds of conflict that will bloom for generations. And as you step outside into the cold London mist, you know the story isn't done. The wheel of scandal is only starting to turn, and in the shadows, the ghost of Catherine of Aragon still kneels, whispering prayers that may yet outlast the king's fleeting passions. The fog hasn't lifted from London when you're pulled back into the palace, where the echoes of Anne Boleyn's coronation are already souring. The scent of roast meat and candle wax from her triumphal feast still clings to the air, but underneath it you catch the sharp smell of fear. Anne has given Henry a daughter, not the son he demanded, and though Elizabeth will one day rule with brilliance, right now she's just a baby swaddled in disappointment. You drift through Whitehall's corridors and feel the tension pressing like damp wool on your skin. Everyone senses the king's passion cooling, his eyes wandering, his patience splintering. Here's the fact locked in history. Henry VIII's marital saga did not end with Anne. In total he had 6 wives: Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Divorce, beheading, death. Divorce, beheading, survival. The rhyme schoolchildren chant today sums up the grisly carousel of royal unions. And every single turn of that carousel was fueled by scandal, whispers of adultery, accusations of betrayal, and the ever-present obsession with producing a son. Now, the fringe detail. Did you know that Anne Boleyn was rumoured to have a 6th finger on one hand and a mole on her neck? Marks some contemporaries interpreted as signs of witchcraft. Modern historians doubt it, but in the charged atmosphere of Tudor court politics, any physical oddity could be spun into evidence of devilish influence. Imagine being queen and knowing that even your body was on trial. That whisper of deformity still clings to her legend centuries later, like a stubborn shadow. The scholarly debate here swirls around Henry himself. Was he truly driven by lust and dynastic fear? Or was his erratic pattern of marriages a symptom of deeper issues, perhaps even a medical condition? Some suggest he suffered from untreated traumatic brain injuries from jousting accidents, which could explain his violent mood swings and irrational decisions. Others argue his behaviour was entirely in character for a monarch used to absolute control. His bedchamber simply became an extension of his throne. You wander the galleries and watch him pace, his eyes bloodshot, muttering about treason one moment and love the next. And you realise the truth may be a mix of both. Anne's story turns dark quickly. She fails to produce a male heir, and Henry's frustration ferments into paranoia. In 1536 she is arrested on charges of adultery, incest and conspiracy, charges most historians now believe were fabricated to clear the way for the Jane Seymour, Henry's new favourite. You hear the clang of the tower gate closing behind her, the hush of the crowd as she mounts the scaffold. Her speech is calm, dignified, even forgiving toward the king who condemned her. When the French executioner swings his sword, you feel the sickening finality ripple through the court. The woman who once dazzled a king dies quietly, her daughter Elizabeth too young to understand that her mother's fall will one day shape her reign. But Henry's scandal engine doesn't stop. Almost immediately, Jane Seymour slips into Anne's vacant place. Jane gives Henry what he wants, a son, Edward, but dies soon after childbirth. For Henry, it's a twisted triumph. He finally has his male heir, but the cost is another wife buried in the ground. He commissions Jane's tomb, lavishing more grief on her memory than on any of the others, as though her short life justified all the turmoil before. You sense in that grief not romance, but relief. She delivered the prize he craved. The carousel turns again. Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, enters the story with a portrait by Hans Holbein. Henry, convinced she looks appealing on canvas, agrees to the marriage for political reasons, but when he meets her in person, he sneers, calling her a Flanders mare. The marriage is annulled within months, and Anne wisely accepts the role of beloved sister rather than risk a headless end. You catch her wry smile in the background, perhaps the only woman who managed to escape Henry with wealth, dignity, and her neck intact. Then comes Catherine Howard, young, reckless, and tragically naive. Barely out of her teens, she becomes Henry's fifth wife, but rumours of past lovers surface, along with accusations of new affairs. Whether guilty or merely careless, she too ends up at the Tower, her terrified screams muffled by the same walls that claimed Anne Boleyn. You linger in the shadows as she's dragged to the scaffold, her youth a cruel contrast to the king's swollen, ulcer-ridden body rotting on the throne. Finally, Catherine Parr, the sixth wife, survives Henry. Twice widowed before, she is pragmatic, learned, and careful. She nurses the king in his declining years, navigating the dangerous politics of his court with tact. You see her hands, ink-stained from her writings, trembling slightly as she balances affection with survival instinct. Her scandal lies not in her love life, but in the fact that she nearly falls victim to religious accusations herself, spared only by Henry's waning attention span. By the time Henry dies in 1547, you step into a silence heavier than the sound of bells tolling. 6 queens have passed through his chambers, some leaving heads on the block, others titles in disgrace, and still others sons and daughters who will inherit the fractured kingdom. The Tudor court is littered with them perfume bottles, bloodstains, and broken promises, and you can't help but feel that Henry's own body mirrored his reign, once powerful and magnificent, but collapsing under its own weight by the end. As you drift out into the misty streets of London, you hear the rhyme echo faintly, like a lullaby with sharp edges: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. A children's chant, yes, but in your ears, it's the echo of a scandal-ridden throne that rewrote history one doomed queen at a time. The fog of Henry's reign hasn't cleared before you feel yourself tugged northward, over damp fields and into the echoing stone halls of Scotland. The air smells sharper here, peat smoke and heather, a chill that seeps through your cloak. And in these draughty castles you find another queen, who learned that love, lust and politics rarely play nicely together. Mary Stuart, better known as Mary Queen of Scots, is already a legend in progress, and not because she chose her suitors wisely. She has a habit of turning romance into catastrophe, and you're about to witness how each marriage brings her closer to a scaffold of her own. Here's the historical fact. Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old. Shipped off to France for safety, she grew up amid silks, perfumes, and Catholic ceremony, married the French Dauphin at 16, and briefly became Queen Consort of France. But when her young husband died, she returned to Scotland, widowed and vulnerable, walking into a political hornet's nest. You see her ride through Edinburgh, her French gowns too bright against the grey stone, the local nobles muttering under their breath about her Catholic faith and foreign airs. And here comes the first scandalous turn. In 1565, Mary marries her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. On paper it makes sense. He's handsome, has a claim to the English throne, and their union could strengthen her legitimacy. But in reality, Darnley is a disaster. Arrogant, jealous, and spoiled, he parades around court demanding recognition as king. You sit in a smoky chamber and watch him glare at Mary's secretary, David Rizzio, a man so close to her that rumours of an affair begin to swirl. Jealousy festers into violence. One night in March 1566, Darnley and a group of armed nobles burst into Mary's chamber. Torches flare, steel scrapes, and you hear her scream as they drag Rizzio out, stabbing him more than 50 times, while Mary, heavily pregnant, is forced to watch. The blood stains the floorboards, seeping into the grain, a grotesque reminder that her private life is now a public battlefield. The fringe rumour? Some whispered that Rizzio really was the father of her unborn child, James. Most historians dismiss it. James grew to look very much like Darnley, but the gossip clung like ivy as feeding the legend of Mary's dangerous appetites. The scholarly debate here lies in Mary's role in what happens next. Less than a year later, Darnley is found dead outside Edinburgh, strangled in a garden after the house he was staying in mysteriously exploded. Did Mary conspire in the murder? Was it orchestrated by her new favourite, James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell? Or was it a plot by the nobles to frame her? The truth is tangled in a web of politics and desire, and scholars still wrestle with the evidence. You crouch near the rubble, smelling smoke, hearing the whispers of poison and betrayal, and realise that no matter the truth, Mary's reputation is burned beyond repair. Within months she marries Bothwell, the man most suspected of killing Darnley. Talk about scandal, the whole country reels. Some insist she was kidnapped and forced into the union. Others believe she went willingly, swept up in passion or desperation. Either way, the optics are a nightmare. Nobles rebel, her supporters dwindle, and soon she's a prisoner, forced to abdicate in favour of her infant son, James VI. You watch as she cradles her baby one last time, his soft coos at odds with the hard reality that she'll never raise him. Mary flees to England, hoping her cousin Elizabeth V will help. But if you think Elizabeth is in the mood for family therapy, think again. Elizabeth sees Mary not as kin, but as a rival claimant to her own throne. You feel the air grow colder as Mary is shuffled from one castle prison to another. A queen in name only, her jewels pawned, her gowns faded, her letters scrutinised. Yet even here, scandal follows her like a shadow. She flirts with guards, writes secret notes, plots escape, and always, her beauty and charm linger, just enough to keep her dangerous. The final scandal of Mary's love life is written in invisible ink across her imprisonment. Coded letters are discovered, the Babington plot tying her to a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Whether she truly endorsed it or was merely caught in the web of overzealous supporters is still debated. Scholars argue, was she a mastermind or a pawn? But the result is the same. In 1587, after 19 years in for captivity, Mary is led to the execution block at Fotheringhay Castle. You're in the room as she sheds her black gown to reveal a crimson underdress, the colour of Catholic martyrdom. Her hands tremble only slightly as she lays her head on the block. The first axe blow is clumsy, the second more decisive. When it's done, the crowd murmurs, and her little dog hidden under her skirts runs out, whimpering in her blood. It's a scene both grotesque and heartbreakingly human. As the hall empties, you're left with the sense that Mary's downfall wasn't just about love gone wrong, but about how scandal magnifies weakness in a ruler. Her marriages weren't simply personal, they were political earthquakes, shaking Scotland, rattling England, and setting the stage for her son James to unite the crowns years later. Mary, Queen of Scots, was undone as much by her heart as by her enemies, her life proof that in royal history, romance is never just romance. It's a loaded weapon aimed at the throne itself. The echo of the axe at Fotheringhay hasn't faded before you're carried across the channel into a palace so glittering it almost blinds you. Versailles. The year is the late 1600s, and the corridors here smell of beeswax and roses, the polished marble floors reflecting candlelight are like pools of fire. You stand in the Hall of Mirrors, gold dripping from every surface, and realise you've arrived at the beating heart of absolute monarchy. Here, one man's appetites aren't just whispered scandals, they're a policy. Louis IV, the Sun King, doesn't simply rule France. He performs it, and his mistresses are as much a part of the show as his crown. The historical fact here, Louis XIV had a series of official mistresses, women so prominent they were practically part of his court structure. Françoise Athénaïse de Rochechouart, better known as Madame de Montespan, became his maîtresse en titre, the chief mistress, and wielded influence over appointments, policies, and even the arts. She bore him several illegitimate children, many of whom he later legitimized. You walk into her apartments and smell the musky perfume lingering in the velvet drapes. her laughter spilling down the corridors like another form of currency. Now the fringe detail, Madame de Montespan was implicated in the affair of the poisons, a scandal that rocked Paris in the 1670s. Accusations swirled that she used love potions, aphrodisiacs, even black masses to keep the king's desire. Witnesses claimed she stood over an altar where infants were sacrificed, whispering prayers for Louis's eternal devotion. Most historians think these were exaggerations born of hysteria and political enemies, but imagine the atmosphere. You can almost hear the crackle of paranoia in those shadowed chambers, the way incense might mask something darker. Whether true or not, the rumour made its mark, staining her reputation forever. The scholarly debate. How much power did Louis's mistresses actually wield? Some argue they shaped policy directly, securing titles and fortunes for their allies. Others suggest their influence was exaggerated, a convenient scapegoat when decisions went badly. You watch courtiers bow low, offering Montespan petitions tucked with bribes, while others muttered that she's steering France into ruin. The truth may lie somewhere in between. In a system where the king himself is the sun, even reflected light can scorch. As you wander the gardens, manicured to geometric perfection, you sense the contradictions of Louis's reign. The Sun King embodies order and magnificence, yet his private life is a carnival of excess. When he tires of Montespan, he turns toward Madame de Maintenon, a woman of piety and restraint who eventually marries him in secret. The contrast is almost comedic. One mistress rumoured to dabble in sorcery, the next counselling him on godliness and modesty. Versailles itself seems to shift tone, gilded debauchery in one wing, hushed devotions in another. Still, the scandal lingers like smoke. Montespan is eased out of the spotlight but never fully falls. She remains a symbol of how the king's desires could elevate or destroy. You imagine her walking the long colonnades in twilight, jewels glinting, as she remembers the days when all of France bent toward her like sunflowers. Her children by Louis play in the gardens, legitimized and dressed in silks, proof that scandal here isn't an embarrassment, it's practically dynastic policy. Step into a Versailles ball and you'll see it firsthand. Harpsichord music floats through gilded halls, masks hide smirks, and every dance is another political manoeuvre. Behind the powdered wigs and embroidered cuffs, the question simmers. Who holds the king's attention tonight? For some, it's a matter of survival. A noble's fortunes might rise or fall depending on whether his niece caught Louis's eye. It's scandal as currency, traded in glances and whispered promises. And you can't help but notice the ripple effect. Across Europe, other monarchs copy Louis's model of court life, mistresses and all. Scandal becomes institutionalized, an expected part of the royal theatre. You hear echoes of Versailles in Vienna, Madrid, even London, though no one quite matches the French flair for mixing seduction with statecraft. By the time Louis dies in 1715, worn out but still insisting on ceremony, the palace is heavy with ghosts of scandals past. The mistresses are gone or cloistered, their portraits staring down from gilded frames. Versailles itself becomes their monument, every chandelier a reminder that desire and politics waltz together here under crystal light. You walk the silent hall of mirrors one last time, the polished floor cool under your feet, and sense how the Sun King's love affairs weren't distractions from power, they were part of its architecture. As you step into the gardens, the fountain sputtering under a moonlit sky, you realise this truth. In Louis XIV's France, scandal didn't weaken the throne. It glorified it, wrapped it in perfume and rumour, making even sin part of the royal spectacle. The candles of Versailles gutter and fade, but you're not leaving France just yet. You slip a few decades forward, into a court still dripping with gold but carrying a very different mood. Louis XV now sits on the throne, the beloved king, whose reign began with promise but soon sagged under extravagance and whispers. The palace air feels heavier, more perfumed than ever, like roses left too long in water. And in the centre of this languid haze stands a woman whose story still crackles with scandal, Jeanne Bécu, better known to history as Madame du Barry. The historical fact, Jeanne was born in 1743, the illegitimate daughter of a seamstress. Through wit, beauty, and a string of wealthy lovers, she rose from obscurity to become Louis XV's official mistress, succeeding the famous Madame de Pompadour. By 1769 she had been installed at Versailles, given the title of Comtesse, and showered with jewels. You step into her gilded chambers and see the transformation. Silks, diamonds, and gilded furniture replacing the rough cloth of her childhood. Her presence is intoxicating, not just for the king, but for the courtiers, who marvel at how far charm could carry someone in a world obsessed with birthright. Now the fringe rumour. Pamphlets and gossip accuse Madame du Barry of being little more than a high-class courtesan. Her enemies sneered at her lack of noble pedigree, mocking her accent, her past, even her taste. Some even claimed she smuggled diamonds in her hair, or bribed ministers with favours beyond the political. Whether true or not, the stories flew through Paris like wildfire, feeding the growing resentment toward Versailles and its gilded excess. Imagine tavern chatter. The poor grumble over bread while the king drowns his affections in a woman they call a prostitute in pearls. The scholarly debate centres on her influence. Did du Barry truly wield political power, or was she merely a glittering distraction? Some historians argue she had little real sway compared to Pompadour before her, acting mainly as a companion to soothe the aging king. Others point out that she secured pensions, titles, and favours for allies, shaping the flow of court politics in subtle ways. You stand in the gallery, watching dukes and counts bow low before her, their smiles stretched tight, wondering if they respect her or simply fear exclusion from her circle. The scandal grows sharper when you realise her presence wasn't just controversial in Paris, it irritated Europe's royalty. When Louis XV tried to present her at court, Marie Antoinette, newly arrived from Austria, famously refused to speak to her for years, considering her beneath royal dignity. You can almost hear the silence between them at balls, the cold weight of unspoken insult pressing like frost on the gilded mirrors. Du Barry smiled anyway, her diamonds flashing, as though reminding everyone that power doesn't care about etiquette. You wander through Versailles during her height, the salons thick with powdered wigs and gossip. The king, older now, relies on her for companionship even as his health wanes. Ministers grumble that her presence embarrasses the monarchy, but Louis doesn't care. He showers her with jewels so large they sparkle like miniature suns, defiant reminder that affection, even scandalous affection, has its price. And yet, as the years roll forward, the opulence curdles. By the time Louis XV dies in 1774, the palace feels haunted. Du Barry is banished to a convent, her power gone in an instant. You walk her empty chambers and feel the chill of absence, the echo of laughter replaced by silence. Versailles, once roaring with scandal, suddenly seems like a mausoleum of indulgence. But Du Barry's story doesn't end there. Decades later, during the French Revolution, her past catches up with her. She had lived quietly, even showing generosity to the poor, but her ties to the monarchy made her a target. In 1793 she was dragged before the Revolutionary Tribunal. The crowd jeered, reminding her that diamonds and favours don't count when heads are falling. At the guillotine she begged for more time. Her terror so raw it shocked even hardened Parisians. You hear the blade crash down, her cries cut short, and realise amid how scandal that once elevated her now marked her for destruction. The lesson lingers in the perfumed air. In Louis XV's France, scandal wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalised. Mistresses like Du Barry embodied both the allure and the rot of a monarchy out of touch with its people. Walking the shadowed halls of Versailles, you feel the weight of that contradiction. The laughter, the jewels, the gossip, all glittering on the edge of collapse. The guillotine's echo hasn't yet faded when the scene shifts back across the channel. You're standing in London, the mid-1600s, and the whole city feels alive in a different way. Grimy, bustling, half burned from the great fire, yet pulsing with taverns, theatres and scandalous laughter. At the centre of this noisy carnival is a king who earned the nickname the Merry Monarch. Charles II doesn't hide his appetites. He parades them, weaving them right into the fabric of court life. You can almost smell the ale, the smoke from tallow candles, and the faint trace of perfume that seems to follow him wherever he goes. Here's the firm historical fact. Charles II had a notorious reputation for keeping mistresses, many, many mistresses. Among them were the actress Nell Gwynn, the aristocratic Barbara Villiers, and the French spy Louise de Keroualle. They weren't hidden lovers, they were public figures, flaunting jewels, titles, and influence. Charles fathered at least a dozen illegitimate children, several of whom he acknowledged and elevated with dukedoms. You can picture them at a court masque, the children of scandal seated proudly among nobles who grit their teeth but bow anyway. The fringe rumour adds spice. Nell Gwyn, the sharp-tongued actress, was said to have called herself the Protestant whore, in contrast to Louise, whom the public despised as the Catholic whore. Londoners adored Nell for her wit and her humble origins. She supposedly once sold oranges in the theatre pit before catching the king's eye. Some even claim she fought off an angry mob by declaring, "Pray, good people, be civil. I am the Protestant whore." Was it exactly true? Hard to say, but the legend stuck, cementing her as a folk heroine amid the decadence of court. And here's the scholarly debate. How much did these mistresses influence politics? Some historians argue that women like Barbara Villiers had immense sway, pushing appointments and shaping alliances from the king's bedchamber. Others claim Charles used them as convenient distractions, keeping the nobility busy squabbling over access while he quietly pursued his own agenda. You watch him reclining in his chamber, laughing as courtiers beg Nell for favour or slip coins to Barbara's allies, and you wonder if the merry monarch wasn't the shrewdest man in the room, using scandal itself as a political smokescreen. The mood of his court is almost carnivalesque. After years of Puritan rule under Cromwell, Londoners were starved for pleasure, and Charles delivered. Theatres reopened, fashion exploded with lace and colour, and the court became a playground. But beneath the merriment, unease simmered. Plots brewed in smoky taverns, Protestant and Catholic factions clashed, and rumours of papist conspiracies swirled. Every new mistress seemed to symbolise not just a dalliance, but a political stance, a banner under which factions rallied or muttered. Picture Whitehall Palace during one of his infamous suppers. Musicians play, goblets overflow with wine, and Charles's laughter booms as Nell makes a biting joke at Barbara's expense. The courtiers laugh too, though some hide clenched jaws. Meanwhile, in the shadows, ministers worry about succession. Charles, for all his children, never fathers a legitimate heir with his queen, Catherine of Braganza. The scandal of illegitimacy becomes more than gossip. It becomes a constitutional crisis. The Stuart line dangles by a thread, and every mistress-born child reminds Parliament of what might have been. The streets outside tell a different story. Londoners joke about the king's affairs, but they also grow uneasy. Taxes rise, wars drain the treasury, and rumours of Catholic influence make people nervous. You wander past a tavern, hear ballads mocking Barbara Villiers' greed, Nell Gwyn's wit, Louise de Kerouaille's French accent. Scandal trickles down into satire, the kind that makes kings look mortal and vulnerable. By the time Charles lies dying in 1685, the merry sparkle has dimmed. He whispers a final plea to not let poor Nellie starve, a strange yet tender reminder of how entwined his reign was with his mistresses. You step away from the bedchamber, hearing the muffled prayers of priests, and realise his legacy is tangled. A king who restored joy after Puritan gloom, but who left behind no legitimate heir in a court remembered as much for its scandals as its politics. In the flickering candlelight you can almost see him grin one last time, as though scandal itself was part of his reign's design. Charles II may not have given England stability, but he gave it stories. Wild, bawdy, unforgettable stories that turned a throne into a stage. The laughter of Charles II's merry court fades, and the air thickens with something quieter, more secretive. You find yourself stepping into the late 1700s, a Britain less flamboyant but still thrumming with scandal. This time, though, it isn't a king with a string of actresses, it's a prince who can't keep his heart or his vows in check. George IV, long before his coronation, was already notorious as the Prince of Wales, and his greatest scandal came not from a mistress in the wings, but from a forbidden marriage whispered about in candlelit rooms. Here's the historical fact. George fell deeply in love with Maria Fitzherbert, a twice-widowed Catholic. In 1785, against the Royal Marriages Act and the fury of his family, he secretly married her in a private ceremony. The marriage was invalid under English law because he hadn't received the king's consent, and because she was Catholic, which legally barred her from being queen. Yet George treated her as his true wife for years, showering her with jewels, letters, and emotional dependence. You imagine him, young and petulant, scribbling desperate love notes in gilded ink, while Maria keeps her composure, aware that every stolen kiss is technically treasonous. The fringe rumour adds fuel. Many whispered that George attempted suicide to manipulate Maria into marrying him. One version has him stabbing himself dramatically in front of her, declaring he would die without her. She, horrified, agreed to wed to save his life, and did it really happen? Historians debate the truth, but the story clung to him, reinforcing the image of a man ruled more by passion and melodrama than by sense. You can almost hear him groaning on a chaise, theatrically clutching his chest, as Maria rolls her eyes heavenward but still relents. The scholarly debate swirls around Maria herself. Was she merely a passive figure swept up by the prince's obsession, or did she wield quiet influence in the background? Some argue she held more sway over George than any later mistress or wife, guiding his decisions and tempering his self-destructive tendencies. Others dismiss her as little more than a symbol of his rebellion against royal duty, her power exaggerated by gossip. You picture her walking calmly through the gardens, her face serene while courtiers hiss about the secret queen they dare not name. When George eventually married Caroline of Brunswick and sent him pressured by debts and politics, the scandal doubled. His marriage to Maria had never been legally valid, yet his heart was still tied to her. With Caroline, the union was a disaster from day one. He met her, gagged at her unwashed hair and bad teeth, and loathed her almost instantly. The feeling was mutual. Their wedding night produced a daughter, Princess Charlotte, but nothing else. Soon George was back in Maria's arms while publicly humiliating Caroline, creating a spectacle so grotesque that even Parliament grew uncomfortable. Imagine the drawing rooms of London filled with laughter at caricatures of the prince, obese, drunk, surrounded by mistresses, while his legitimate wife languished in exile. Political cartoonists had a field day, sketching him as a bloated satyr clutching bottles of wine and women, mocking both his morals and his waistline. Scandal wasn't confined to whispers anymore. It was plastered on pamphlets, sung in tavern songs, etched into the collective imagination of a people who had no problem mocking their heir apparent. Yet Maria Fitzherbert endured in the shadows. Even after George drifted to other lovers, even after his official marriage to Caroline, Maria remained the emotional anchor of his life. When he became George IV in 1820, he refused to allow Caroline to attend his coronation, publicly humiliating her one last time. Rumours swirled that he wished Maria could have been queen instead, and in private, he kept her portrait close, referring to her as his true wife. You can picture him, bloated and failing in health, clutching the miniature like a talisman, his eyes misting over with something between regret and obsession. By the time George IV died in 1830, his reign was remembered as much for indulgence and scandal as for politics. He left behind no legitimate heirs. Princess Charlotte had died young, and his reputation was cemented as a cautionary tale of how passion can corrode duty. Maria outlived him, dignified and discreet, refusing to publish her correspondence or fan the flames of gossip. She kept her silence, letting others debate whether she had been the great love of his life or simply the great scandal of it. As you step out of Carlton House, the air feels thick with perfume, spilled wine, and ink from scathing pamphlets. The story lingers. A secret marriage, a forbidden queen who never sat on the throne, and a king remembered more for his waistline and affairs than his crown. Scandal here wasn't just a sideshow, it was the main act, shaping the monarchy's fragile balance between image and reality. The scandalous whispers around George IV dissolve, and you find yourself carried into the stately gloom of the Victorian era. The scent here is different, less wine and perfume, more coal smoke and starch, as though the whole empire is wrapped in lace doilies and moral lectures. Yet even in this age of supposed prudence, the royal family isn't immune to gossip. Behind the heavy drapes of Buckingham Palace, behind Queen Victoria's iron sense of duty, there are rumours, murmurs about her children, their marriages, and the awkward possibility that not every heir was quite as pure as the family tree insisted. Here's the historical fact. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had 9 children who married into almost every ruling family in Europe. She became known as the Grandmother of Europe, her offspring scattering across Germany, Russia, Spain and beyond. But while the family looked like a model of stability in portraits, behind the scenes there were tensions, indiscretions, and questionable choices that fueled gossip in drawing rooms from London to Berlin. You can imagine those stiffly posed family photos hiding cracks beneath the glossy surface. The fringe rumour? Whispers swirled that Victoria's son Bertie, later Edward VII, might not have been Albert's child at all. His physical appearance, stockier and less refined than his siblings, fueled speculation that Victoria had been close, perhaps too close, to her Scottish servant John Brown. Later in life, after Albert's death, her attachment to Brown became another source of scandal. Some even alleged they secretly married, pointing to her private notes and the peculiar respect she demanded for him. Was Bertie really Albert's son? Most historians dismiss the claim, but the rumour clung stubbornly, as if people longed to puncture the Victorian facade of propriety. The scholarly debate focuses on Victoria herself. Was she genuinely the paragon of morality she projected? Or did she carefully curate an image while allowing double standards within her family? Some argue that the rigid moral codes she preached were at odds with her own behaviour, her intense reliance on Brown after Albert's death, her tolerance of certain children's indiscretions, her emotional outbursts behind closed doors. Others defend her as sincerely devoted to duty, her private quirks exaggerated by those eager to scandalise. You picture her, small but commanding, scribbling in her journal, late into the night, her emotions spilling onto paper even as the world saw only the stern matriarch. The spotlight often fell on her children. Bertie, the eerie, was notorious for his dalliances even before inheriting the crown. His affairs as Prince of Wales were so frequent they embarrassed the monarchy, and his mother despaired of his lack of seriousness. You can almost hear her scolding him in clipped tones while he sneaks off to prison salons filled with champagne and courtesans. Then there was Princess Louise, rumoured to have had affairs with sculptors and noblemen, her independent streak clashing with Victorian expectations. Princess Beatrice, the youngest, was accused of excessive closeness to her mother, remaining her constant companion well into adulthood, which fuelled its own odd whispers. Across Europe, the royal marriages Victoria arranged often brought scandal with them. Her daughter Vicky married into Prussia, where court gossip bristled with anti-English sentiment. Her granddaughter Alexandra married the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, carrying Victoria's blood into a dynasty doomed by revolution. And in Spain, her grandson Alfonso XIII was rumoured to indulge in affairs and pornography, dragging her lineage into continental tabloids. Scandal, it seemed, was hereditary. Inside Britain, rumours about haemophilia in the family, passed down through Victoria's genes, added another layer of intrigue. The royal disease weakened sons, raised questions about legitimacy, and complicated dynastic politics. When her great-grandson Alexei, son of the last Russian Tsarina, was born with haemophilia, it opened the door to Rasputin's infamous influence. You can trace the line backward, feel the ripple of scandal stretching from Victoria's private chambers all the way to the collapse of the Russian Empire. Yet Victoria herself never admitted to scandal. She projected an image of stern morality, her Black Widow's garb after Albert's death becoming iconic. But you sense the dissonance. In public, she preached propriety. In private, she poured her emotions into letters and perhaps indulged attachments that blurred the line between servant and consort. The contradiction makes her less a marble statue and more a human woman caught between desire and duty. By the time Victoria died in 1901, the empire mourned a grandmotherly figure who seemed to embody stability. But beneath the mourning crepe, the rumours lingered. Was Bertie truly Albert's son? Did she marry John Brown in secret? Were her children as pure as official portraits claimed? The truth was never settled, and maybe that was the point. In an age obsessed with morality, the royal family remained tantalisingly human. Their flaws tucked behind curtains, but never fully hidden. As you leave the gaslit streets of Victorian London, you feel the contradiction pressing in. A queen who built an empire on respectability, yet whose private life fueled the very gossip she tried to suppress. Scandal here wasn't painted in bright colours. It was sewn in muted threads, stitched into the family portraits, whispered behind lace fans, impossible to erase. The gas lamps of Victoria's London flicker out, and you drift into the early 1900s, where the atmosphere feels looser, smokier, and far less buttoned up. The man now on the throne is Edward VII, Victoria's son, the same Bertie who was once the bane of her moral lectures. He spent decades as Prince of Wales, waiting impatiently for the crown, and in that long apprenticeship he perfected a very different kind of monarchy. If Victoria's reign was wrapped in mourning veils and moral strictness, Edward's was draped in velvet, champagne bubbles, and Parisian perfume. Here's the historical fact. Edward VII was a notorious playboy. Even before he became king in 1901, he He was linked to dozens of mistresses, many of them celebrated actresses or aristocrats. Perhaps his most famous was Lily Langtry, the Jersey lily whose beauty and wit captivated him and half of Europe. He was also entangled with Alice Keppel, whose name would resurface generations later when her great-granddaughter Camilla stepped into the same royal spotlight. You wander into a pocket London club and can almost see Edward leaning back in his chair. Cigar in one hand, a lady's gloved hand resting on the other, while politicians look the other way. Now, the fringe rumour. Edward was rumoured to keep a custom-made love chair in a Paris brothel, designed to support his large frame and allow his partners to manoeuvre around him. The piece, still whispered about today, was supposedly preserved as a curiosity. Whether myth or truth, it paints a vivid image. The future King of England, rotund and indulgent, literally inventing furniture to accommodate his pleasures. It's the kind of detail that makes you both chuckle and shake your head at the absurdity of royalty behaving like a character in a bawdy farce. The scholarly debate focuses on his mistress's political influence. Did women like Alice Keppel merely comfort him? Or did they help soothe tensions and shape decisions? Some historians argue Keppel acted as a calming force, persuading Edward to temper his temper, while others dismiss the idea that a king who spent much of his time at racecourses and dinner parties was really being steered by lovers. Still, you watch Alice glide into a salon, her smile practiced, her words carefully chosen, and you realise that even if she wasn't shaping treaties, she was shaping the man who signed them. His affairs were hardly secret. Newspapers abroad openly joked about the king's lovers, and while British papers were more restrained, everyone knew. You stroll through Edwardian drawing rooms, hear the laughter behind fans, see the raised eyebrows when his name is mentioned, alongside yet another actress or society hostess. Yet unlike the scandals that doomed others, Edward's indulgences seemed almost accepted, perhaps because they fit the spirit of the age. The Edwardian era was one of glamour, parties and excess, and his personal life became part of the national mood. Still, scandal lingered around him in more dangerous ways. As Prince of Wales, he had been dragged into the Royal Baccarat scandal of 1890, where he was caught playing illegal card games with friends. When one player was accused of cheating, the trial became a media circus, with Edward forced to testify in court. Imagine the heir to the throne sitting in the witness box, sweat beading on his brow, while the public devoured every detail. It wasn't about cards, it was about the prince's reputation, and it painted him as frivolous and reckless long before he wore the crown. By the time he became king, Edward VII leaned fully into his role as a symbol of indulgence. He was a bon vivant, a man who loved food, fashion and company, the very opposite of his dour mother. He dined on multi-course meals dripping with sauces, wore tailored suits with extravagant detail, and surrounded himself with companions who mirrored his appetite for pleasure. You can almost hear the clink of glasses at his table, the hum of laughter spilling into the early hours of the morning. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, his lifestyle, he was surprisingly effective as a monarch. He charmed foreign leaders, earning the nickname Peacemaker, and helped lay the groundwork for alliances that would matter when World War I broke out. The irony isn't lost on you. The man mocked for his mistresses and indulgence turned out to be a skilled diplomat, proving that scandal and statecraft can share the same bed. As Edward's health declined, his mistresses remained loyal. Alice Keppel was at his bedside when he died in 1910, her presence a final reminder that his private life could never be separated from his public one. You picture the scene, courtiers stiff and formal, doctors murmuring and Alice quietly weeping, allowed into the room where even some family members were not. When you step back into the Edwardian twilight, you feel the contradictions clinging to your coat. A king mocked for gluttony and gossip, yet respected as a statesman. A man who turned scandal into identity, who made indulgence not a weakness but a brand. The throne didn't collapse under his affairs, it glittered with them, even as the shadows of war loomed closer. The velvet of Edward VII's world fades, and the room cools into something more brittle, more tense. You're standing in Britain of the 1930s, where jazz clubs hum, newspapers churn, and the monarchy suddenly looks fragile. This isn't about a mistress, or a dalliance brushed aside with a wink. This is about a love so scandalous it topples a king. You can hear the murmur of radios, the clicking of typewriters, and the faint rustle of silk dresses as high society gossips about Edward VIII and the woman who would change the monarchy forever, Wallis Simpson. The historical fact, Edward VIII, eldest son of George V, was king for less than a year. His reign began in January of 36 and ended that December when he abdicated the throne to marry Wallis, an American socialite twice divorced. The problem wasn't just her nationality or her past, it was the Church of England, of which the monarch is the head, refusing to allow a king to wed a twice-divorced woman with living ex-husbands. You step into Buckingham Palace and feel the tension, Edward pacing, chain-smoking, insisting he cannot live without her, while ministers shuffle papers, their voices tight with disbelief. Now the fringe rumour. Whispers swirled that Wallis Simpson had learned techniques during her first marriage in China, skills that made her irresistible to Edward. Journalists avoided printing the specifics, but society gossips filled in the blanks, suggesting she held him in thrall not by beauty. She was stylish, but not conventionally stunning, but by something far more intimate. The nickname That Woman dripped from aristocratic lips, implying she was a seductress rather than a partner. Whether true or not, the rumour stuck like glue, fueling the narrative that Edward was bewitched, helpless under her spell. The scholarly debate. Historians still argue over Edward's motives. Was his abdication really about love, a romantic sacrifice etched in history? Or was it a convenient exit for a man ill-suited to kingship who preferred leisure, luxury and Wallis's company to the burdens of ruling? Some see a genuine, if reckless, devotion. Others see selfishness dressed up as reverence. You watch him in a garden throwing a ball for his dogs, grinning at Wallis's quips, and you wonder, is this passion or avoidance in its most glittering form? The scandal reached fever pitch in late 1936. British newspapers, under pressure from the government, initially suppressed the story, but abroad, especially in America, the press ran wild. Soon the secret was out. The king intended to marry a woman the establishment considered utterly unacceptable. In Parliament, voices thundered. Politicians declared that the crown could not bend to one man's desire. Edward countered with quiet stubbornness. He would not give her up. Imagine the electric silence when he finally announced his decision to abdicate. On December 11, 1936, Edward gave a radio address that still echoes through history. He declared he could not carry out his duties without the help and support of the woman I love. You're in the room as his voice quivers slightly, the weight of crown and love balanced on the edge of a microphone. Across Britain, families sit huddled by the radio, stunned. Some admire his devotion, others feel betrayed. A king has chosen romance over duty, and the monarchy trembles. In his place, his younger brother, George VI, takes the throne, a shy, stammering man who never expected to rule. You sense his terror as he steps into a role thrust upon him by scandal. Yet he rises to the occasion, steering Britain through World War II with quiet courage. Meanwhile, Edward becomes the Duke of Windsor, exiled from power but endlessly trailed by gossip. Their life together is glamorous and strained in equal measure. The Windsors float through Europe and America, mingling with the rich and famous, yet scandal shadows them. During the war, Edward is accused of Nazi sympathies. Photographs of him and Wallis visiting Hitler in 1937 only stoke suspicion. Were they naive socialites, flattered by attention, or genuine sympathisers with fascism? Historians still argue. The debate is unsettled as the smoke curling from Wallis's ever-present cigarette. You catch them years later in their French villa, sipping cocktails under gilded lamps, both stylish, both brittle. Wallis quips with the acid wit. Edward laughs, his charm intact but edged with weariness. They never regain royal status, never fully escape the scandal that defined them. And yet their bond endures, whether through passion, dependence, or shared exile. When Edward dies in 1972, Wallis follows in 1986. They're buried side by side at Frogmore, their gravestones simple, almost modest, as though the storm of their lives needed only quiet in death. You stand among the manicured trees and realise this. Their story was less about romance, and more about what happens when love collides with duty, when scandal doesn't just stain a crown but shatters it. As you leave the villa's ghostly echo behind, you can still hear his radio voice, fragile yet resolute. The king who gave up his throne, and the woman who made it impossible for him to keep it. The echo of Edward VIII's abdication still hangs in the air as you step into the post-war glow of Britain. The mood is lighter now, rationing fading, jazz clubs buzzing, a sense of possibility blooming after years of hardship. But inside Clarence's house, another royal scandal is quietly unfolding. One not about kings or abdications, but about a woman who embodied glamour and rebellion in a family obsessed with duty. Princess Margaret, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, was stylish, witty and restless. And in her life, love stories weren't just whispered gossip. They became national dramas, testing the monarchy's image in the modern age. Here's the historical fact. Margaret's first great love was Group Captain Peter Townsend, a handsome war hero and equerry to her father, King George VI. By the early 1950s, after George's death and Elizabeth's sudden accession, Margaret's romance with Townsend ignited headlines. He was dashing, devoted, and divorced. That was the problem. Under the strict moral codes of the time, and with the Church of England still frowning on remarriage after divorce, the idea of the Queen's sister marrying a divorced man was unthinkable. You can almost see them in a quiet drawing room, Margaret's cigarette glowing in the dim light, Townsend leaning close, both aware that love here meant defiance. Now the fringe rumour, tabloids whispered that Margaret was far more rebellious than the official story suggested, sneaking out to parties, drinking, and even dabbling with bohemian artists long before Townsend. Some gossip even painted her as the royal family's wild child, the one who secretly delighted in shocking the establishment. Was she truly that reckless? Or was the press simply hungry for a counterpoint to Elizabeth's dutiful reserve? Either way, the nickname stuck. Margaret was the spark of scandal in a family trained to smother it. The scholarly debate focuses on her decision to give up Townsend. In number 55, after years of speculation, Margaret announced she would not marry him, citing her duty to the Commonwealth and her loyalty to the Church. Some historians believe she was forced by political pressure and family duty. Others argue she chose freely, realising life as the wife of a divorced equerry would diminish her royal status. Was it heartbreak or pragmatism dressed in piety? Scholars still argue, pointing to her later choices as evidence she may never have been ready to sacrifice privilege for love. You find her years later at glittering London parties, her tiara gleaming under chandeliers, her laugh sharp as champagne bubbles. In 1960, she marries Anthony Armstrong de Jones, a society photographer who becomes Earl of Snowdon. The match shocks everyone. A princess marrying not a prince or duke, but a commoner with a camera. The wedding is televised, watched by millions, a dazzling spectacle of modern romance. Yet behind the glamour, trouble brews. Their marriage is tempestuous, filled with affairs, arguments, and eventual collapse. Margaret's lovers become tabloid fodder. Younger men, aristocrats, even actors are rumoured to warm her bed. One infamous photograph shows her lounging on the island of Mystique, cigarette in hand, with Roddy Llewellyn, a man nearly 20 years her junior. When the picture hits the press, the scandal explodes. The Queen's sister, in a swimsuit and sunglasses, living like a jet-set celebrity. It feels worlds away from Buckingham Palace decorum. You can almost hear the collective gasp of Britain's breakfast tables. The fallout is brutal. In 1878, Margaret and Snowdon formally divorce, the first royal divorce in modern times, long before Charles and Diana made it seem almost routine, for the monarchy is a blow to the carefully polished image of stability. For Margaret, it's liberation tinged with loneliness. You see her retreating more often to Mystique, where the sea air smells of salt and rum, the nights alive with music, laughter and scandalous freedom. Her life becomes a contradiction. Duty and defiance, glamour and decay. She is photographed in dazzling jewels one night, then in tabloid spreads about health issues the next. Rumours of heavy drinking and chain-smoking trail her once vibrant beauty slowly eroded by excess. Yet through it all, she never loses that spark, that mischievous gleam that made her seem more human, more real than her royal peers. The tragedy of Margaret's story isn't just in the failed romances, but in the way her life became a cautionary tale. She wanted love, passion, and freedom, but the monarchy demanded sacrifice. You watch her sip from a crystal glass at a late-night party, her laugh echoing, and you feel the weight of what might have been, if she had chosen Townsend, if she had defied the system outright. Instead, she walked the line between rebellion and duty, and the strain left its mark. By the time she dies in 2002, the world remembers her as both glamorous and tragic, a princess who lived in colour while her sister reigned in black and white. You step away from her story with the sense that Margaret carried the monarchy into the age of celebrity, where scandals weren't whispered in drawing rooms but splashed across front pages. Her loves didn't just change her life, they reshaped how the public saw the royal family, not as untouchable icons but as flawed, passionate and painfully human. The Caribbean breeze of mystique fades, and you're swept into the polished, camera-flashed world of the 1980s. The air smells of fresh hairspray, wet roses and tabloid ink. It's the era when the monarchy, once carefully shielded, collides head-on with global media. At the centre of the storm are three names you know by heart: Charles, Diana and Camilla. Their triangle isn't just a scandal whispered in drawing rooms, it becomes the most publicised royal drama of the century. A saga that unfolds in front of millions and redefines what it means to live and love under a crown. The historical fact: in 1981, Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer in what was billed as the wedding of the century. A shy kindergarten aide of aristocratic background, Diana seemed the perfect bride, young, beautiful, and untainted by scandal. The spectacle was enormous. 750 million people watched worldwide as she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in her puff-sleeved gown with a 25-foot train. Yet even before she reached the altar, the cracks were there. Charles was in love with someone else, Camilla Parker Bowles, and Diana suspected it. You can almost hear the echo of her whispered words years later. There were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Now the fringe rumour. When Charles and Diana's relationship began unravelling, tapes of their private conversations leaked in the most embarrassing ways. In one infamous phone call between Charles and Camilla, Charles joked that he wished he could be reincarnated as her tampon just to stay close to her. The tabloids splashed it everywhere, shocking the public with the vulgar intimacy of their affair. Whether you laugh or cringe, it's undeniable proof that the royals weren't marble statues, they were messy, fumbling humans caught in the spotlight. The scholarly debate centres on Diana herself. Was she a naive victim, manipulated into a loveless marriage for dynastic purposes? Or was she a savvy figure who learned to use the media to her advantage, shaping her own myth as the people's princess? Historians still argue both sides. You watch her stepping out of a car, her sapphire ring glittering, cameras flashing, her eyes lowered, but her posture regal. Vulnerable, yes, but also aware that every shutter click was another chance to control the story more. As the marriage falters, the scandals pile up. Diana confesses her struggles with bulimia and depression, her loneliness in palaces that echo with silence. Charles, meanwhile, retreats further into Camilla's arms, leaving Diana to find comfort elsewhere. Rumours of her own affairs swirl, most notably with cavalry officer James Hewitt, whose red hair sparked endless tabloid speculation about Prince Harry's paternity. Was it true? DNA suggests otherwise, but the gossip never fully died, another reminder of how the Windsors' private lives became public property. The drama crescendos with Diana's famous 1995 panorama interview. Sitting under dim lighting, her eyeliner smudged just slightly, she speaks plainly to millions. I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts. You watch the broadcast flicker on living room screens across Britain, the nation gasping at her candour. For the monarchy, it's a nuclear bomb. The carefully cultivated aura of stoicism shatters. The public now knows exactly how messy, painful and scandal-ridden the royal marriage had become. By 1996, the divorce is official. The fairy tale that began with a glittering carriage ride ends with ink on a decree absolute. Diana loses her title of Her Royal Highness, but she gains something more powerful: independence and a direct line to the people. You see her stepping onto a landmine clearance field in Angola, her helmet tilted, her smile calm, redefining what royalty could mean, not pomp, but compassion. Then comes the tragedy. In 1997, Diana dies in a Paris car crash, chased by paparazzi on motorbikes. The world grieves as though a family member has been lost. Flowers pile outside Kensington Palace in mountains, their scent of lilies and roses mingling with candle wax and rain. Charles faces public fury while Camilla hides from the cameras. The monarchy itself feels shaken, teetering between reverence and irrelevance, but scandal, as always, evolves. Years later, Charles and Camilla slowly re-emerge. Their relationship, once reviled, becomes tolerated, then quietly accepted. By the time they marry in 2005, public opinion has softened, though never entirely forgotten the shadow of Diana. You picture their wedding, less pomp, more pragmatism, a subdued ceremony acknowledging decades of controversy. Camilla eventually becomes queen consort, proof that even the most scandalous love affairs can be rebranded with enough time, patience, and royal stubbornness. As you step back from this triangle, you realise it wasn't just a scandal, it was a cultural earthquake. It showed the monarchy couldn't hide behind walls anymore. Their personal lives were tabloid fodder, broadcast globally, dissected by millions. Diana, Charles, and Camilla didn't just live through scandal, they became its embodiment, symbols of how love, betrayal, and media spectacle could rewrite the very role of royalty in modern times. The cameras from Diana's funeral still flash in your mind when the scene skips forward. Now the air feels tense, tabloid-scented, and strangely digital. It's the 2000s and 2010s. And you're not just reading scandals in newspapers anymore. You're scrolling through them on screens, each rumour and revelation spreading at the speed of Wi-Fi. The House of Windsor, already bruised by the Charles and Diana saga, finds itself once again dragged into controversy. This time the scandal clings not to a king or an heir, but to a prince whose reputation collapses in real time. Andrew, Duke of York. Here's the historical fact. Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, was once dubbed Randy Andy by the press for his party lifestyle and string of girlfriends. For years his antics were brushed off with a wink, but in the 2010s, his friendship with financier Jeffrey Epstein, later convicted of sex trafficking, turned from embarrassing gossip into a global crisis for the monarchy. Photographs emerged, Andrew strolling in Central Park with Epstein, lounging in private mansions, even smiling from the doorway of Epstein's New York townhouse. The images reek of scandal, sticking to him like cigarette smoke on velvet. Now the fringe rumour. Conspiracy theorists whispered that Andrew's ties to Epstein went far deeper than acknowledged, involving secret parties and hidden guests in Caribbean villas. Some claim tapes existed, implicating powerful men in compromising situations. None of it proven, but the whispers amplified the sense that this was more than just poor judgment. You imagine the hush of a late-night jet, champagne glasses clinking, cameras hidden, the air thick with the sense that if anyone spoke, entire reputations could crumble. The scholarly debate. Whether Andrew's downfall damaged the monarchy irreparably, or whether it was merely another chapter in the institution's long survival of scandal. Some argue that in an era obsessed with transparency, his case revealed the monarchy's fragility, how one prince's choices could taint the whole crown. Others insist the monarchy is resilient, its core role symbolic rather than moral, capable of weathering even the ugliest storms. You picture royal advisors around a polished table, whispering strategy, debating whether exile or rehabilitation might contain the flames. The scandal explodes in 2019 when Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's accusers, files a civil lawsuit against Andrew, claiming she was forced to have sex with him when she was 17. The allegations are shocking enough, but then comes the infamous BBC interview, an attempt at damage control that becomes a catastrophe. You watch Andrew sit stiffly in a chair, insisting he couldn't sweat at the time due to a medical condition, denying ever meeting Giuffre despite a widely circulated photograph showing them together. His explanations sound bizarre, his tone defensive, and by the end of the broadcast, public opinion has all but condemned him. You can feel the walls closing in. Charities drop him, the military withdraws titles, and eventually the Queen herself strips him of official duties. For a man once considered her favourite son, it's a brutal fall. You imagine the silence of Windsor Castle, corridors thick with disappointment, Andrew pacing alone as the monarchy distances itself, preserving its image by cutting him adrift. The settlement of Giuffre's lawsuit in 2022 ends the legal battle, but not the scandal. Andrew admits no guilt, but pays a reported multi-million-pound sum, fueling speculation about hush money. Public anger doesn't subside. In the age of hashtags and Twitter storms, the damage is permanent. Unlike past scandals, this one doesn't feel romantic, tragic, or even slightly glamorous. It feels sordid, corrosive, a reminder that royalty doesn't live above consequence in the modern world. The fringe of the story stretches even further. Protesters hold signs reading, "Prince Andrew is a nonce" during royal events, booing him in public. His presence at Queen Elizabeth II's funeral raises eyebrows, and whispers about whether King Charles III will permanently sideline him swirl. Once, scandal might have been erased by silence and control. Now, it spreads endlessly online, archived in memes, TikToks, and unforgiving search results. You realise this is a turning point. Cleopatra and Caesar, Henry and Anne, Charles and Camilla, all their scandals reshaped thrones, but carried an air of tragic romance. Andrew's is different. It's about accountability, legality, the collision of privilege with a society less willing to forgive. You step into the chill of modern London streets, neon lights flickering against rain-slick pavement, and feel how scandal has evolved. It's no longer whispered behind fans. It's blasted in headlines, dissected on podcasts, debated in Parliament. And as Andrew retreats into the shadows, his reputation beyond repair, you're left with the uneasy sense that this is what scandal looks like in the 21st century. Not a love story that shakes a throne, but a reckoning that stains it, possibly forever. The neon-lit streets fade, and now you find yourself wandering through snow-dusted courtyards, the air sharp with the smell of pine smoke and gun oil. Welcome to Russia, where scandal is stitched as tightly into the fabric of the Tsarist court as ermine of fur. The Winter Palace glimmers in the moonlight, but behind its gilded gates, whispers of affairs, illegitimate children, and hidden liaisons echo through marble corridors. Unlike Britain's tabloid dramas, Russian scandals often turn deadly, entangling dynasties with war, assassination, and revolution. Here's the historical fact. Russian Tsars were rarely paragons of marital fidelity. Take Peter the Great, for example, who flaunted mistresses while publicly humiliating his first wife, Eudoxia. He eventually forced her into a convent, freeing himself to pursue Catherine, his second wife and eventual empress. Fast forward a century and you find Catherine the Great, whose rumoured affairs became as legendary as her political reforms. But even before her, the Romanov court was thick with mistresses, lovers, and scandals that shaped policy as much as any treaty. You can almost hear the crackle of frosted boots in candlelit halls, the rustle of silk skirts as lovers slip behind velvet curtains, the fringe rumour, Tsar Alexander I, the hero who defeated Napoleon, was long suspected of faking his own death. Some claimed he grew weary of court life and the guilt of political intrigues, including whispers of his complicity in his father's murder. According to legend, he fled to Siberia under a false identity, living as a holy man named Fyodor Kuzmich. Whether true or not, the rumour made every conversation about Alexander's reign sparkle with mystery. Was he a ruler haunted by scandal or a ghost wandering the steppes in repentance? You picture a cloaked figure disappearing into the snow, the truth buried under frost. The scholarly debate often centres on how much these affairs influenced policy. Did mistresses merely satisfy the Tsar's appetites, or did they act as political partners, shaping decisions from the bedchamber? Some argue that women like Catherine Dolgorukova, mistress and later morganatic wife of Alexander II, held real sway, pushing reforms and securing positions for allies. Others dismiss them as distractions, scapegoats for unpopular choices. You stand in a gilded salon, hearing ministers mutter about the woman's influence, their voices dripping with contempt, even as their careers depend on her favour. Take Nicholas I, for instance, whose iron-fisted reign was peppered with rumours of affairs, or Alexander II, who openly took Dolgorukova as his mistress while still married to Empress Maria. When Maria died, Alexander married his mistress in secret, a scandal that horrified his children. It wasn't just gossip, it fractured the royal family, with his legitimate heirs resenting the new wife and her children. The tension added to the instability of his reign, already threatened by revolutionary plots. You step into the Winter Palace ballroom, chandeliers blazing, uniforms glittering with medals. Behind the pomp, alliances are tested not just on the battlefield but in bed. Courtiers watch closely. Who gets a smile, a nod, a whispered word from the Tsar's companion? In a court where power flows through intimacy, scandal isn't a distraction, it's the bloodstream. The danger, though, is that scandal leaves cracks in authority. Alexander VI, despite his progressive reforms like freeing the serfs, was assassinated in 1881. Some whispered his indulgence in love affairs made him reckless, inattentive to threats. Whether fair or not, the connection between private indulgence and public vulnerability stuck. You walk past the blood-stained cobblestones of St. Petersburg, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air, and feel how quickly whispers can transform into revolution. Even Nicholas II, the last Tsar, wasn't immune. His marriage to Alexandra was genuine, deeply romantic, but scandal seeped in through Rasputin, the mystic whose influence over the empress fueled rumours of impropriety. Was Rasputin merely a healer for their haemophiliac son, or something more sinister? The whispers that Alexandra and Rasputin were lovers spread like wildfire, corroding respect for the throne. You can almost see peasants muttering in taverns, their suspicion growing until scandal merges with political fury and ignites a revolution. By the time the Romanovs fall in 1917, scandal is inseparable from their story. Love affairs, illegitimate children, rumours of holy men in bedrooms, it all feeds into the narrative of a dynasty out of touch, corrupted from within. Standing in the snow outside the Apatiev house, where the family meets their grim end, you sense how private whispers can fester into public rage, until even the mightiest empire collapses under the weight of its own secrets. As you leave Russia's frozen palaces behind, you feel the chill of a lesson colder than the steppe winds. In a land of autocrats, scandal isn't just titillating, it's deadly. The frost of the Romanovs melts into candlelight and brocade, and suddenly you're inside a palace that smells of beeswax and citrus, the chambers buzzing with gossip. Catherine II of Russia, Catherine the Great, has taken the throne, and her name alone conjures scandal. Few rulers in history are as entangled in rumours of their private life, and fewer still manage to turn those rumours into an empire-defining legend. Here, in the echoing halls of St. Petersburg, you see how her reputation for lovers, true or fabricated, was wielded both as a weapon against her and as part of her myth. The historical fact: Catherine seized the throne in 1762 after her husband, Tsar Peter III, was deposed and later murdered under mysterious circumstances. Whether she had direct involvement remains debated, but what's clear is that she emerged as sole ruler and never remarried. Instead, she took lovers, several over the decades, who were often younger men, elevated to prominence through her favour. Grigory Potemkin, her most famous companion, wasn't just a lover but a political partner, helping her expand the empire into Crimea and build the Black Sea Fleet. You can almost hear their whispered strategizing under embroidered bed curtains, the lines between pillow talk and statecraft blurring completely. Now the fringe rumour: Catherine's name is forever linked to the infamous myth that she died while attempting intimacy with a horse. It's grotesque, completely false, and yet it has outlived centuries of scholarly rebuttal. The origin likely came from French pamphleteers eager to smear her as a lustful foreign usurper. You imagine a Parisian cafe, smoke curling as pamphlets are passed around, scandal trumping truth. The rumour's survival shows how misogyny and politics fuse to reduce a powerful woman to salacious caricature. Catherine didn't just face palace coups, she fought reputational warfare waged in the filthiest of terms. The scholarly debate digs into whether her lovers were signs of weakness or savvy governance. Was she genuinely enthralled by passion, or were these relationships carefully chosen, rewarding loyalty and ensuring control over powerful nobles? Some historians argue she rotated lovers not out of lust but to prevent any single man from consolidating too much influence. Others suggest her affections were sincere, that her letters reveal real longing and tenderness, especially toward Potemkin. You picture her writing by the lamplight, her words flowing with both political calculation and unmistakable warmth, the empress and the woman inseparable on the page. The court itself was a theatre of scandal. Foreign ambassadors reported her every romantic entanglement back to Europe, their dispatches dripping with innuendo. Satirical poems circulated, calling her insatiable, her lovers interchangeable, yet none of it dimmed her power. Instead, Catherine leaned into the narrative of passion, presenting herself as a ruler guided by both reason and vitality. In portraits, she's dressed in armour, holding a sword, yet the court whispers always added, "And who warms her bed tonight?" Her reign saw immense achievements: legal reforms, expansion of territory, patronage of the arts. Yet it's her private life people clung to. Even her relationship with Potemkin has its share of mystery. Some insist they secretly married, a union hidden to preserve her autonomy. Others say their bond transcended categories, morphing from lovers to lifelong allies. You can almost hear their quarrels echoing down marble corridors, followed by reconciliation feasts that left courtiers guessing who held the greater power. Catherine's later lovers were often much younger, handpicked by Potemkin himself, which only stoked gossip further. Critics painted her as predatory, unable to live without constant companionship. But was this indulgence, or another form of political theatre? By elevating handsome young guardsmen, she reminded the court that she, not any noble faction, controlled access to the throne. Love affairs, in this light, were less scandal and more strategy, velvet-wrapped demonstrations of dominance, and yet the rumours never stopped. Even in death, her story was twisted. She died in 1796 of a stroke, but the horse myth overshadowed her legacy in popular imagination. It was easier for her enemies to reduce her to a lurid tale than to grapple with the truth that she was one of the most successful monarchs of her century, outlasting rivals and expanding her empire while wrapped in whispers of lust. You stand in her private chambers, walls lined with portraits, gilded mirrors reflecting candlelight. The air hums with contradictions, a ruler of immense intellect dismissed as a libertine, a woman who modernized Russia yet remembered in crude jokes. You feel the injustice of it, but also the inevitability. Scandal clings hardest to women who seize power in worlds that tell them they shouldn't. As you step out into the icy Petersburg night, the domes of cathedrals glinting under the moon, you realise Catherine's true scandal wasn't her lovers, or the myth spun around her. It was that she refused to play by the rules, and in doing so rewrote them, leaving history to choke on its own rumours. The gilded halls of St. Petersburg dim, and suddenly the scent of orange blossoms and Neapolitan street smoke fills your lungs. You've arrived in the late 18th century, in Naples, where the Bourbon court hums with intrigue, laughter, and the sharp sound of whispered rumours. Maria Karolina of Austria, sister of Marie Antoinette. Is Queen Consort here? She steps through the palace in layers of silk and lace, her eyes watchful, her smile a mask. And like her infamous sister, she's no stranger to whispers of scandal, both political and intimate. The historical fact, Maria Karolina married Ferdinand IV of Naples in 1768, cementing a powerful Habsburg-Bourbon alliance. She quickly became the real power behind the throne, since Ferdinand preferred hunting, eating and carousing to governing. Maria Karolina inserted herself into state affairs, shaping alliances, pushing reforms, and navigating the dangerous tide of Napoleonic Europe. But with power came rumours, and with rumours came scandal. Courtiers whispered about her special friendships with influential men, questioning whether loyalty and love were always separate in her court. Now for the fringe rumour, Maria Karolina was accused of taking lovers among her ministers, particularly Sir John Acton, the Anglo-Italian naval commander she elevated to Prime Minister. Critics claimed their relationship was more than political partnership. Pamphlets in Naples painted her as a foreign seductress, ruling through her bed as much as her throne. Whether they were truly lovers remains unproven. Acton was notoriously pious and possibly even celibate, but the gossip was too delicious for enemies to resist. Imagine the smoky back rooms of Naples, merchants and nobles muttering that the Queen spent more time in Acton's arms than with her boorish husband. The scholarly debate focuses on how much of this was misogyny versus reality. Was Maria Karolina simply a strong political player smeared by men who couldn't handle her authority? Or did she blur the lines between personal and political in ways that fueled the rumours? Some historians defend her as shrewd and disciplined, pointing to her careful reforms and diplomatic skill. Others suggest her reliance on Acton crossed boundaries, leaving just enough ambiguity to feed scandal. You can see her walking arm in arm with him through palace gardens, courtiers watching from the shadows, wondering whether they're witnessing governance or romance. The backdrop of her life was chaos. Revolution spread like wildfire across Europe. Her sister Marie Antoinette was guillotined in 1793, her death a personal and political blow. Maria Karolina wore mourning black, but the rumours didn't fade. Some whispered she used her grief as justification for tightening her grip on power, while others speculated her alliances with men like Acton were desperate attempts to hold on to stability. Every move she made seemed tinged with scandal, as though being a woman in power guaranteed suspicion. The Neapolitan court itself was a carnival of contradictions. On one side, the Queen championed Enlightenment reforms, building schools, promoting arts and modernising the navy. On the other, nobles whispered about her temper, her cunning and her supposed infidelities. You wander through a ballroom dripping with chandeliers, watching her glide across the floor in a gown stitched with pearls. Ministers bow low, but their eyes flick sideways, waiting to catch any hint of impropriety. Then comes the Napoleonic tide. French troops sweep into Naples, and Maria Karolina flees, her enemies gloating. Pamphlets mock her as a cowardly libertine, more interested in lovers than loyalty. Even in exile, the rumours follow her, sticking harder than the truth of her political manoeuvres. She writes desperate letters, pleading with allies to restore her throne, her words sharp and commanding. But the echo that carries through Europe is the scandal, not the strategy. And yet scandal never fully destroyed her. She returned to Naples with her husband in 1799, though her influence waned as Ferdinand aged and her own health declined. Even then, whispers about her past affairs resurfaced, as if the public couldn't separate her legacy from the rumours. You watch her sit in her chamber, grey hair tucked beneath lace, her fingers trembling over a letter, her face both weary and defiant. By the time she dies in 1814, Maria Karolina leaves behind a legacy as tangled as her reputation. Was she a brilliant queen who outmaneuvered rivals in an age of revolutions? Or a schemer whose personal entanglements blurred the line between throne and bed? History still can't decide. As you step out into the warm Neapolitan night, the streets alive with song and the sea breeze salty in your lungs, you realise that Maria Karolina's greatest scandal wasn't necessarily her rumoured lovers. It was that she dared to act like a king in a world that demanded queens stay silent. And like her sister in France, she learned that when women seized power, the world often preferred to remember the gossip over the governance. The Mediterranean night dissolves into the heavy air of Madrid, where incense from cathedrals mixes with the musk of court corridors. You've arrived in Bourbon, Spain, a dynasty notorious for intrigues and indulgence. Here, in palaces where the walls are thick with velvet and candle smoke, sandal seeps like spilled wine. If France perfected the art of the royal mistress, Spain turned it into political chaos, with affairs that didn't just rattle bedrooms, they fractured alliances and shaped wars. The historical fact: Philip V of Spain, grandson of Louis XIV, brought French flair and French habits into Madrid when he took the throne in 1700. His reign and those of his descendants were marked by favouritism toward mistresses and queens whose reputations were anything but serene. Fast forward to Charles IV in the late 18th century, and the scandal practically burst into fireworks. His queen, Maria Louisa of Parma, was the subject of endless rumours about lovers, most infamously Manuel de Godoy, the ambitious young guard who rose to become prime minister. You can picture them: Maria Louisa, sharp-eyed and imperious, and Godoy, handsome and opportunistic, whispering in corners while the king looked on. Now the fringe rumour. Many whispered that Godoy was more than the queen's favourite, that he was the father of several of her children. Pamphleteers gleefully spread cartoons of Maria Louisa as a lustful matron, Godoy grinning beside her, while Charles IV was mocked as oblivious or cuckolded. Did she really bear Godoy's children? Most historians doubt it, pointing out the lack of evidence beyond slander. But the whispers were too powerful to ignore. They transformed Godoy's meteoric rise from soldier to duke into a story not of merit, but of bedroom politics. The scholarly debate focuses on Godoy himself. Was he truly the Queen's lover, riding her favour to power, or simply a convenient scapegoat for unpopular policies? Some argue he was a capable, if flawed, statesman whose reforms were drowned in gossip. Others insist his entire career was built on scandal, his relationship with Maria Louisa the only explanation for his unprecedented influence. You stand in a Madrid salon hearing nobles mutter that the Queen's bed is the true cabinet, their envy and disdain mixing into the smoky air. The scandal didn't stay contained to whispers, it bled into politics. Spain's alliance with Napoleonic France, negotiated under Godoy's influence, led to disastrous wars and humiliations. When French troops marched into Spain in 1808, the people's anger boiled over. Riots erupted in Aranjuez, Godoy's palace was stormed and he barely escaped with his life. Maria Louisa and Charles IV were forced to abdicate, their dynasty crumbling under the weight of both scandal and French cannons. You can almost hear the jeers of the mob, their rage not just at kings and treaties but at the Queen's rumoured lover who had become the face of corruption. Step into the court decades earlier though, and you'll find the same pattern repeating. Ferdinand VI's court was haunted by the gossip about his melancholic queen, Barbara of Portugal, who was said to retreat into music while rumours of his infidelities swirled. Later, Isabella II in the 19th century would endure her own storms of scandal. Her marriages tangled with accusations of affairs that made her reign infamous. Spain, it seems, couldn't escape the rhythm, passion and politics forever entangled. The Spanish Bourbons never enjoyed the polished tolerance of the French court toward royal mistresses. Here, affairs became weapons, wielded by enemies to legitimize rulers. Maria Louisa's reputation as a lascivious queen wasn't just cruel gossip, it was a rallying cry for those who sought to topple her husband's rule. You picture pamphlets fluttering through Madrid streets, ink caricatures mocking the queen's supposed affairs, the whispers of the tavern mixing with the shouts of revolution. By the time the Napoleonic Wars end, Spain's monarchy lies in tatters, its throne wobbling between restoration and collapse. Yet the memory of Maria Louisa and Godoy lingers, their names cemented as symbols of scandal. Even when exiled, they remained inseparable, fueling the belief that where there was smoke, there had always been fire. As you walk through the halls of the Royal Palace of Madrid, the chandeliers glittering like frozen tears, you realise scandal here wasn't just about love, it was about legitimacy. In France, a mistress could sparkle as a jewel of court culture. In Spain, a queen's rumoured lover could topple a dynasty. The Bourbon legacy became less about power and more about the corrosive mix of passion and politics, a reminder that in Spain, scandal didn't decorate the throne, it dismantled it. The marble corridors of Madrid blur, and now you're standing in Stockholm, the air crisp with Nordic chill, the streets echoing with boots on cobblestones. It's the mid-1600s, and inside the Swedish royal court sits a queen who doesn't fit neatly into any box. Christina of Sweden, crowned at the age of 6 after her father's death in battle, grows into a ruler both brilliant and eccentric. Celebrated for her intellect, yet notorious for scandal. If the Bourbons' affairs tangled them in politics, Christina's passions entangled her with identity itself, gender, power, and the very definition of monarchy. Here's the historical fact. Christina reigned as Queen of Sweden from 1632 until her shocking abdication in 1654. She was highly educated, spoke multiple languages, and surrounded herself with philosophers, artists, and scholars. Her court became a hub of intellectual life, hosting luminaries like René Descartes, whom she famously summoned to Stockholm during a freezing winter. He caught pneumonia and died. Yet Christina was never content with traditional queenship. She wore men's clothes, refused to marry, and openly flouted the expectations of her gender and station. You see her striding through her court in boots and a doublet, her hair cropped shorter than any lady's, the courtiers whispering but daring not to confront her. Now for the fringe rumour, Christina's close relationships with women fueled endless speculation. Letters suggest deep intimacy with her lady-in-waiting, Ebba, whom she called her bedfellow, and wrote to with expressions of love. Some contemporaries whispered that their relationship was romantic, while others dismissed it as exaggerated affection common in the 17th century. Add to that Christina's masculine dress and refusal to marry, and the rumour mill spun furiously. Was she Sweden's first openly queer monarch centuries ahead of her time, or simply a ruler uninterested in conventional marriage? The ambiguity still fascinates. The scholarly debate centres on her abdication. Why did she give up the throne at just 27? Some argue it was exhaustion. She disliked the constraints of monarchy and chafed under pressure to marry and produce an heir. Others point to her conversion to Catholicism, a shocking move in staunchly Protestant Sweden, as her real motivation. Was she running toward faith or away from duty? Scholars disagree, and you can imagine her pacing in her chamber, candlelight flickering on her sharp features, a pen scratching across parchment as she plans an exit that would scandalise Europe. When Christina abdicated, she did it with theatrical flair. In Uppsala Castle, she removed her crown, orb and sceptre, stepping down in front of stunned nobles. She dressed in male attire for her departure, riding south toward Rome with swagger. The Swedish people were baffled. Foreign courts delighted in gossip, and Europe gained a royal figure who seemed to prefer philosophy, travel and intrigue to ruling. You picture the procession, a former queen dressed like a cavalier, her laughter echoing off the icy hills, scandal trailing her like a cloak. Her adventures after abdication only deepened the drama. In Rome, Christina was celebrated as a Catholic convert and eccentric celebrity. She filled her salons with musicians, poets, and intellectuals, playing the role of queen without crown. Yet scandal followed. She became embroiled in rumours of affairs, both male and female, and her masculine presentation sparked whispers in every palace she visited. In 1657, she even plotted to seize the throne of Naples with French backing, an audacious move that failed spectacularly. Each scheme, each flirtation seemed to confirm her reputation as both brilliant and reckless. And then, the darker rumours. In 1657 she ordered the execution of her master of the horse Monaldeschi, accusing him of betrayal. The killing, carried out in Fontainebleau Palace, horrified European courts. A queen in exile, still exercising lethal authority over a lover or confidant, depending on which account you believe. Was it justice, or passion turned deadly? You hear the echo of swords clashing in the gallery, blood staining marble, courtiers gasping in disbelief. By the time Christina died in 1689, buried in Rome's St. Peter's Basilica, she had become one of history's most enigmatic royals. Sweden remembered her as a scandalous queen who abandoned her people. Rome remembered her as a glittering patroness of the arts. Historians remember her as a puzzle. Was she driven by passion, by faith, by intellect, or by a refusal to live inside anyone else's expectations? As you step out into the Stockholm winter, snowflakes stinging your cheeks, you realise her greatest scandal wasn't whom she loved or how she dressed. It was that she chose her own script in a world that demanded obedience. Christina didn't just abandon her throne, she redefined what it meant to wear one. The cold of Stockholm fades, and suddenly the air grows still, humid, tinged with incense and cherry blossoms. You've stepped into imperial Japan, where scandal takes a subtler, more dangerous shape. Here, in a society obsessed with harmony, ritual, and appearances, love stories that strayed from tradition carried explosive consequences. Unlike Europe, where mistresses strutted through gilded halls, Japan's emperors and princes were expected to embody restraint, even divinity. But behind palace screens painted with cranes and chrysanthemums, forbidden romances stirred whispers that threatened to crack centuries of carefully guarded decorum. Here's the historical fact. For much of its history, the Japanese imperial family lived under rigid rules of marriage and inheritance. Emperors and princes were bound to alliances arranged with powerful aristocratic families. Love had little room in the equation, but that didn't stop it from creeping in like moonlight through paper screens. The Meiji period in the late 1800s brought this tension to a head. Emperor Meiji himself, though married to Empress Shokan, kept concubines as tradition allowed. Yet his heart seemed to rest more with them than with his official spouse. This duality was tolerated, barely, but it laid bare the contradiction between ancient custom and modern scrutiny as Japan opened to the world. Now the fringe rumour, in the early 20th century, Crown Prince Yoshihito, later Emperor Taisho, was said to have fallen deeply for a woman outside the rigidly approved marriage circle. Though married to Empress Taimei, rumours suggested he sought affection elsewhere, wandering from prescribed courtly behaviour. His fragile health and eccentric behaviour only fed gossip, with whispers that his passions made him unfit to rule. Whether exaggerated or real, these stories tarnished his image, suggesting that love could unravel even the most sacred of thrones. The scholarly debate circles around a bigger question. How much autonomy did Japan's emperors really have in their marriages and private lives? Some argue that the throne was so tightly controlled by court nobles and later government officials that romance had no real room. Emotions were stifled in favour of duty. Others insist that personal choices, even whispered ones, had immense impact, shaping public perception and destabilising the carefully built myth of imperial perfection. You can almost hear the shoji screen sliding shut, hiding tender moments from the watchful eyes of ministers who saw scandal as national shame. The most famous modern case comes in 1959, when Crown Prince Akihito, later emperor, chose to marry Michiko Shoda, a commoner, breaking with centuries of tradition. This was no arranged dynastic union, theirs was a love match, and it set off a cultural earthquake. Conservative voices raged that Michiko was unfit, her middle-class background an insult to imperial purity. Tabloids claimed she was bullied by courtiers, accused of failing to match aristocratic expectations. Some even whispered that the pressure drove her to nervous breakdowns. Yet despite the scandals, the couple endured, and Michiko eventually became one of the most beloved empresses in Japanese history. Even later, when Crown Prince Naruhito married Masako Owada in 1993, the cycle repeated. Masako, a brilliant diplomat fluent in several languages, was seen as a modern international bride. But rumours of her struggle to conceive an heir, paired with pressure from the palace and tabloids, fueled whispers of marital strain. Scandal here wasn't about affairs or mistresses, but about fertility, expectations, and the suffocating weight of tradition. Masako withdrew from public life for years, her absence sparking sympathy from some and criticism from others. You picture her gazing out of a palace window, the sound of cicadas outside, her private struggles dissected by millions who would never know her personally. Unlike Europe, where scandal often glamorized royals, in Japan it cut deeper, threatening the very legitimacy of the throne. A single rumour could tarnish not just an individual but the divine aura of the imperial line. When Akihito later abdicated in 2019, Japan's first abdication in over 2 centuries, commentators looked back on his marriage to Michiko as proof that even in the most rigid systems, love could bend tradition without breaking it entirely. You stand now in Kyoto's imperial palace gardens, the air heavy with the fragrance of pine and earth after rain. The koi in the pond ripple the surface, a mirror of the imperial family's story. Calm on top, turbulence hidden beneath. Scandal in Japan wasn't splashed across pamphlets or shouted in taverns. It was whispered, suppressed, yet always present, shaping the line of emperors with as much force as any law. As you step away beneath lantern light, you realise the lesson. Scandal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through paper walls, reshaping thrones with a silence more powerful than any shout. The lantern light of Kyoto flickers out, and you find yourself in the Forbidden City, where silence is thicker than stone walls and every breath feels watched. The Qing dynasty rules here in the 18th century, and though emperors are cloaked in ritual and divinity, their private lives swirl with intrigue. Concubines shuffle through vermilion gates, their silk slippers barely whispering against polished floors. Behind painted screens of dragons and cranes, love and rivalry twist into something far sharper. Scandal that decides who lives, who dies, and who shapes the future of China itself. Here's the historical fact. Chinese emperors maintained harems of concubines, sometimes numbering in the hundreds. The hierarchy was strict, with ranks determining everything from clothing to meals. At the top stood the empress, but even she wasn't secure if the emperor's affection strayed. Scandals often erupted when a concubine gained extraordinary favour, upsetting balance and angering officials. One of the most infamous was consort Jen during the reign of the Guangxu Emperor in the late 19th century. Nicknamed the Pearl Concubine, she was young, beautiful and outspoken, encouraging Guangxu to embrace reform. Empress Dowager Cixi saw her as a threat. In 1900, during the chaos of the Boxer Rebellion, Jen was executed, pushed down a well in the Forbidden City. You can almost hear the splash, the echo of silken water, scandal sealed with stone. Now the fringe rumour, during the Ming dynasty, the Jijing emperor was said to have been obsessed with Taoist elixirs of immortality, often supplied through bizarre rituals involving young palace girls. Some accounts claimed he drank potions made from their menstrual blood or forced them into exhausting rites. The stories may have been exaggerated by critics, but they painted a picture of a ruler consumed by lust, disguised as spirituality. You imagine darkened chambers lit by incense, alchemists whispering promises of eternal life, while the line between faith and exploitation blurs. The scholarly debate focuses on the role of concubines in politics. Were they powerless pawns, or did they wield real influence? Some historians argue women like Cixi, who rose from concubine to empress dowager, prove that scandalous relationships could reshape dynasties. Others suggest such cases were exceptions, with most concubines trapped in gilded cages, their lives dictated by imperial whims. You picture the courtyards at dusk, clusters of women whispering, each hoping to catch the emperor's eye, each risking becoming a footnote or a weapon in someone else's game. One of the most fascinating figures is Cixi herself. Selected as a concubine of the Xianfeng emperor, she gave birth to his only surviving son, securing her rise. After his death, she manoeuvred behind the throne, ruling as regent for nearly half a century. To her supporters she was shrewd and capable. To her enemies she was manipulative, clinging to power through scandal and seduction. Rumours claimed she poisoned rivals, bankrupted the empire for her luxuries, and even manipulated eunuchs for personal gain. Were these smears by men furious at a woman's power, or kernels of truth buried under layers of propaganda? Scholars still argue, their debates as heated as palace intrigues. Walk through the Forbidden City at night, the moonlight glinting off golden roof tiles. The silence is deceptive. Somewhere, a concubine writes poetry mourning her lost family. Elsewhere, another laughs as she slips a jade hairpin into her rival's tea. Every favour, every touch of the emperor's hand is a potential scandal. And in a system where the throne itself is sacred, those scandals ripple outward, destabilising ministers, armies, even entire dynasties. The public rarely saw these dramas, but they sensed them. Gossip trickled out through servants, through rumours carried into tea houses and markets. Scandal became folklore, shaping how emperors were remembered. The Chongzhen emperor, last of the Ming, was rumoured to have executed his beloved concubine to appease critics. When the dynasty fell in 1644, that story joined the chorus of blame, proof that even affection could doom a dynasty. By the time the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, the Forbidden City was less a palace than a mausoleum of scandals. Its empty halls echoed with centuries of whispers, wells filled with bodies, chambers steeped in perfume and betrayal, dynasties toppled by passion disguised as politics. You stand at the Meridian Gate, the cold stone beneath your feet humming with memory, and realise these scandals weren't distractions from history, they were its pulse, beating behind red walls until the empire itself fell silent. As you leave, the silence of the Forbidden City seems heavier than any roar. In Europe, scandal meant pamphlets and caricatures. In China, it meant life or death. Here, behind Vermilion gates, love was never private. It was a weapon, and the empire was always listening. The Vermilion gates of Beijing blur, and now the air thickens with spice and sandalwood. You've stepped into the jewelled courts of India, where scandal doesn't whisper, it sings. The Mughal emperors and regional maharajas lived in a world of gilded palaces, perfumed gardens, and harems filled with women who were both companions and political players. To the outside eye, the harem seemed like a hidden world of silken song, but beneath the lattice screens it was a furnace of intrigue. Love here was never just about desire. It was about power, succession, and survival. Here's the historical fact. The Mughal harem, especially during the reigns of Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, could house hundreds, even thousands of women. These weren't only wives and concubines, but also female relatives, attendants and servants. Yet the emperor's favourites wielded immense influence. Nur Jahan, wife of Jahangir in the early 1600s, became so powerful that coins were struck in her name, a staggering breach of tradition. She wasn't just his beloved, she was his co-sovereign. You picture her walking through the harem gardens, jasmine in the air, her eyes sharp as she dictates imperial orders while courtiers bow in uneasy silence. Now the fringe rumour, Shah Jahan, the same emperor who built the Taj Mahal for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, was rumoured to have taken comfort in his daughter Jahanara Begum after Mumtaz's death. Contemporary sources hint at an unusually close relationship, feeding speculation that it crossed into forbidden territory. Most historians dismiss this as slander spread by rivals, but the rumour persisted, staining the marble glow of the Taj with a shadow of scandal. Imagine pilgrims standing before the white dome, whispering that the monument to eternal love might have been built by a man entangled in forbidden passion. The scholarly debate focuses on whether harems were prisons or power centres. For centuries, Western writers imagined them as cages of idle women, exoticised and silenced. But modern historians argue the opposite. They were buzzing hubs of politics. Women formed alliances, influenced succession, and steered emperors through pillow talk and persuasion. Was scandal in the harem simply the weapon men used to discredit female power? Or were the women themselves active conspirators in shaping dynasties? You see a circle of women in silk saris, their jewels glittering as they whisper strategies, deciding which prince would rise and which would be exiled. Consider Jahangir again. His drinking and opium indulgence left governance in Nur Jahan's hands. Courtiers muttered that the empire was ruled from her bedchamber, and foreign envoys noted her visible role in decisions. Scandal became a double-edged sword, proof of her dominance, but also a way for enemies to undermine her. Yet her power endured, proof that intimacy with an emperor could be as potent as a crown. Beyond the Mughal palaces, India's princely states spun their own webs of intrigue. In Rajasthan, Maharajas took dozens of wives, their rivalries spilling into gossip and bloodshed. In Hyderabad, the Nizams were rumoured to surround themselves with singers, dancers and lovers whose influence stretched from music halls into ministries. The British, ever hungry for scandal, exaggerated these stories in colonial accounts, portraying Indian rulers as decadent libertines while ignoring their own entanglements back home. The harem wasn't all velvet and roses. Poisonings, assassinations, and betrayals punctuated its history. Imagine a concubine slipping opium into a rival's sherbet, or a prince's mother plotting his rise while pretending to play chess. Behind the lattice screens, lives turned on a glance, a rumour, or a whispered promise. Scandal wasn't a crack in the system, it was the system. And yet, out of this world of intrigue emerged enduring symbols of love. The Taj Mahal itself stands as a monument to one woman's hold over an emperor's heart. Mumtaz Mahal bore Shah Jahan 14 children, dying in childbirth, and her death shattered him. He built her tomb in marble, studded with semi-precious stones, its dome shining like moonlight. But even here, scandal seeped in. Critics accused him of bankrupting the empire for love, of neglecting his people while he immortalized a single romance. You stand in the courtyard, the white marble glowing under the sun, and realize even beauty this pure carries shadows of controversy. By the time the Mughal dynasty declined, the harems were remembered less for politics and more for scandal, the perfect narrative for enemies to dismiss female power. Yet the truth lingers in whispers. These women shaped dynasties, and their scandals were weapons, sometimes forged by rivals, sometimes wielded by themselves. As you leave the perfumed halls, the air still sweet with rosewater, you understand that India's royal scandals weren't sideshows. They were the engines of empire, where love and betrayal etched themselves in marble, poetry, and rumour alike. The rosewater haze of the Mughal courts fades, and you find yourself drawn west, where the domes of Istanbul gleam over the Bosporus. The air is thick with spices, incense, and the distant call to prayer. You've stepped into the Ottoman Empire, a world where scandal was carefully veiled but always present, lurking behind the latticed windows of the imperial harem. To Western travellers, this harem was exotic fantasy. To insiders, it was the most dangerous political arena in the empire. Here, love affairs weren't private indiscretions, they were matters of state, shaping succession, wars, and even the survival of the dynasty itself. The historical fact: the Ottoman sultans maintained sprawling harems inside Topkapi Palace, filled with hundreds of women, concubines, wives, daughters, and mothers. At the centre was the Valida Sultan, the sultan's mother, who often wielded immense power. In the 16th and 17th centuries, this influence was so strong that historians later called it the Sultanate of Women. The most famous figure was Hurrem Sultan, also known as Roxolana, who rose from enslaved concubine to legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. She bore him sons, broke centuries of custom by marrying him, and became his closest advisor. You picture her walking through the tiled courtyards, her jewelled headdress catching sunlight, while ministers bow not just to the Sultan, but to her shadow. Now the fringe rumour: Hurrem was accused of orchestrating the downfall of Suleiman's beloved son Mustafa, to secure the throne for her own children. The story goes that she conspired with the Grand Vizier to convince Suleiman that Mustafa was plotting rebellion. The Sultan ordered Mustafa's execution, strangled by bowstring in his father's tent. Whether Hurrem truly engineered it remains debated, but the scandal stuck. European observers painted her as a scheming femme fatale, the sorceress who bewitched the Sultan and corrupted the empire. Truth or slander, her name became synonymous with intrigue. The scholarly debate asks, were women like Hurrem truly wielding power, or were they scapegoats for political shifts already underway? Some argue her influence was exaggerated by hostile chroniclers who couldn't accept a woman shaping policy. Others insist her letters and actions prove she was a strategist, using love and loyalty as weapons in a court where men often died young. You imagine her writing a letter to Suleiman from behind gilded screens, her words filled with devotion and political calculation, a queen in everything but title. Hurrem wasn't the only scandalous figure. Kösem Sultan, another concubine turned valide, effectively ruled during the reigns of her sons and grandson in the 17th century. She arranged marriages, manipulated court factions, and was eventually strangled in her bed by rivals. Safiye Sultan before her was accused of flooding Istanbul with Venetian favourites, and Turhan Sultan later fought a bloody power struggle that left the harem dripping with more political intrigue than any battlefield. Each woman became a legend of both scandal and survival. Walk through Topkapi Palace at night, the marble cool under your feet, the shadows long. In the harem chambers, gilded lamps flicker against tiles of blue and green. You can almost hear whispers, concubines gossiping about which rival might be poisoned, which son might be favoured for the throne, which glance from the Sultan might alter destiny. For outsiders, it was a place of seduction. For those inside, it was a place of survival, where every scandal was a strategy. The succession system itself fueled the scandal. For centuries, Ottoman princes were confined to the palace until one was chosen to rule, often after bloody fratricide. Mothers of princes schemed endlessly, knowing their son's survival and their own depended on eliminating rivals. Poisoned sherbets, doctored ointments, and whispered accusations of treason became routine weapons. Scandal wasn't gossip here. It was life and death. Foreign ambassadors fed the stories, exaggerating them for readers back in Venice, Paris, or London. They painted the Ottoman court as a den of lust and corruption, a mirror to Europe's anxieties about Eastern power. In truth, the harem was more bureaucracy than brothel, but scandal made better copy than reality. Even today, Hurrem's supposed machinations are remembered more vividly than Suleiman's conquests, proof of how intrigue outlives empire. By the time the Ottomans declined in the 19th century, the power of the harem waned, but its scandals endured in memory. The empire's enemies cited them as symbols of decadence, while poets and dramatists romanticized them. Step into Istanbul today, wander Topkapi's empty chambers, and the tiles still hum with echoes of footsteps, laughter, and tears. Scandal here wasn't a blemish, it was the empire's hidden engine, humming behind the screens. As you leave through the imperial gate, the Bosporus breeze cool against your face, you realise the Ottoman lesson. Love and scandal weren't distractions from power. They were power, cloaked in silk and guarded by silence, shaping an empire one whispered intrigue at a time. The Bosporus breeze lingers for only a moment before the world shifts again, and you find yourself in a kaleidoscope of palaces, yachts, and tabloid covers. The scandals of antiquity, of harems and abbeys, feel far away, yet the themes remain. Love, desire, and betrayal still haunt thrones, but now the stage is global, splashed across magazine stands, live-streamed on television, dissected in comment sections. From Monaco's glittering casinos to Bangkok's royal court, modern monarchies prove that scandal isn't a relic of history. It's alive, adapting to the digital age, sometimes shaking thrones, sometimes merely decorating them with headlines. Here's the historical fact. In the 20th and 21st centuries, royal scandals have often revolved around love that defies tradition. In Monaco, Prince Rainier III's marriage to American actress Grace Kelly in 1956 was both a fairy tale and a controversy. Critics sneered that Hollywood had invaded the throne. Later, their children's turbulent love lives, Princess Caroline's divorces, Princess Stephanie's affairs with circus performers and bodyguards fed tabloids for decades. What once would have been whispered in salons was now photographed on the Riviera, a reminder that glamour and scandal often walk hand in hand. Now the fringe rumour. In Thailand, King Vajiralongkorn, Rama X, has faced endless speculation about his personal life. Stories swirl of lavish spending, volatile behaviour and dramatic relationships, including the unprecedented recognition of both a royal consort and a queen simultaneously. Photographs of his consort Sininat in combat gear and affectionate poses leaked online in 2019, fueling gossip across the globe. Was it a hack, a palace power play, or a deliberate humiliation? No one outside the inner circle knows for sure, but the rumour mill turned at full speed, showing how scandal in the modern era is inseparable from technology. The scholarly debate in today's context is almost philosophical. Do modern royal scandals actually weaken monarchies, or do they humanise them? Some argue scandals strip away mystique, exposing royals as flawed mortals unworthy of reverence. Others claim the opposite, that scandals make royals relatable, turning them into celebrities whose dramas mirror the public's own. You picture academics sparring at a conference table, one insisting monarchy can't survive when princes are caught on camera in nightclubs, the other countering that those very images keep people watching. Consider Spain. King Juan Carlos V, once celebrated for guiding Spain's transition to democracy, fell from grace amid allegations of corruption and a scandalous elephant hunting trip in Botswana during a financial crisis. His secret relationships only added fuel. By 2014, he abdicated, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Meanwhile, his son, King Philippe VI, has worked tirelessly to rebuild the monarchy's image. The cycle is clear. Scandal erodes, abdication cleanses, continuity survives. Or look to Japan again. Princess Meiko, niece of Emperor Naruhito, married commoner Kei Komuro in 2021 despite years of controversy over his family's finances. The media storm was relentless, painting the romance as unworthy of imperial dignity. Yet Meiko walked away from her royal titles to marry the man she loved, echoing Edward VIII's abdication, but in quieter, modern tones. Scandal here wasn't explosive, it was slow-burning, a reflection of how love can still disrupt centuries of ritual. Even in smaller monarchies, scandal thrives. In Denmark, Prince Joachim's divorce and remarriage caused murmurs. In Norway, Princess Märtha Louise's relationship with a self-proclaimed shaman has sparked criticism. In Jordan, rumours swirl about rivalries within the royal family, sometimes spilling into international headlines. Everywhere you look, crowns glitter under the weight of rumour. And yet, the monarchy persists. Maybe it's because scandal feeds fascination. The more flawed royals appear, the more the public leans in. We don't just watch them rule, we watch them fall in love, fight, stumble, and sometimes implode. In the age of streaming, a crown without scandal might not hold our attention at all. Step into a modern palace. Buckingham, Monaco, Bangkok, Madrid, and the echoes are the same as Cleopatra's chamber or Versailles' hallways. Silk rustles, secrets whisper, and the future of the throne teeters on something as fragile as desire. The settings change, the costumes evolve, but the truth endures. Love and scandal remain twin shadows of power. As you leave this final gallery of history, the glow of smartphones flickers like candlelight, and the scroll of gossip feels no different than pamphlets of centuries past. Scandal has always been the second crown atop a monarch's head, lighter than gold but sharper, always threatening to topple the one beneath. The echoes of palaces, harems, ballrooms and boudoirs soften, like the embers of a fire dying in the hearth. You've travelled from Cleopatra's perfumed barges on the Nile to the neon-lit scandals of our own centuries, and if there's one thread tying them all together, it's that royalty has never been immune to the pull of desire. Crowns may glitter, titles may command obedience, but behind every marble wall and golden throne beats a very human heart, often reckless, often flawed, and almost always hungry for something it shouldn't have. You think back to Henry VIII pacing in his drafty hallways, convinced God approved his divorces, to Catherine the Great smeared by rumours that say more about her enemies than her loves, to Princess Margaret on a beach in Mustique, cigarette in hand, laughing at a world that scolded her for living as brightly as she pleased. Each story is a reminder that power magnifies passion. When ordinary people stumble in love, it's gossip. When monarchs do, it's history. What's striking is how scandal shifts with time. In the Ottoman harem, whispers about a concubine could mean life or death. In the Victorian court, rumours of a servant's friendship with the Queen could tarnish dynasties. In today's world, a leaked phone call or photograph doesn't just damage reputations, it spreads globally in minutes, archived forever. Yet through all those centuries, scandal has rarely destroyed monarchy outright. More often it reshapes it, forcing crowns to bend, never quite breaking. Maybe that's the quiet lesson lingering at the edge of your pillow tonight. Scandal isn't just chaos, it's a mirror. It shows us the fragility of institutions, yes, but also the stubborn resilience of them. Monarchies survive not because they are spotless, but because they adapt, folding yesterday's outrage into tomorrow's myth, polishing rumour until it glints like legend. And so, as you pull the covers a little tighter, let the clamour of Versailles, the whispers of the Forbidden City, and the paparazzi flashes of Kensington fade into background hum. All those kings, queens, sultans, czars, and empresses lived and loved, often disastrously. But their stories remain to lull you into dreams. In the end, maybe the real crown isn't on their heads, it's in the tales they leave behind, scandalous and unforgettable. Rest easy now. The thrones are quiet, the chamber's empty, the candles burned low. The scandals will still be there tomorrow, waiting to be retold. For tonight, though, let history's whispers drift into silence, and may your own dreams be far less complicated than those of the royals we've just walked beside.